Welcome to Her True Stories, where we share real-life tales of resilience, revenge, and redemption. If you love stories of strong women taking control of their destiny, please hit that subscribe button and join our community of empowered storytellers. My name is Carmen Aniston, and at 75 years old, I thought I knew what betrayal looked like. I was wrong. The deepest cuts come from those who share your blood, those you've sacrificed everything for, those you thought would stand by you when the world turned cold. It all began to unravel on a Tuesday morning in September, 3 months before my world imploded completely. I was tending to my prize-winning orchids in the greenhouse I'd built behind the house on Willow Creek Drive, a house I'd owned for 42 years, a house where I'd raised my daughter Jessica as a single mother after her father abandoned us when she was just 6 years old. The morning sun filtered through the glass panels as I carefully misted my rare Paphiopedilum orchid, a beauty that had taken me 3 years to coax into bloom. I heard the kitchen door slam and Jessica's voice, sharp with irritation, talking to someone on the phone. "I don't care what the financial advisor says, Marcus. She's sitting on a gold mine and doesn't even realize it. This house alone is worth at least $2 million now, maybe more with the property values in this neighborhood." I froze, my hand hovering over the delicate petals. They were talking about me, about my house. "She still thinks it's 1985, Jessica continued, her voice carrying clearly through the thin walls. "Driving that old Honda, shopping at discount stores, clipping coupons like she's broke. Meanwhile, she's probably got more money than she knows what to do with." My heart began to race. How did Jessica know about my finances? I'd been so careful, so private about my investments and savings. After her father left us high and dry, I'd sworn never to be financially vulnerable again. I'd worked 3 jobs, secretary by day, bookkeeper by night, and weekend house cleaner, to keep us afloat. But more importantly, I'd educated myself about money. I'd read every financial book I could get my hands on, attended investment seminars, and slowly, methodically, built a fortune that would ensure I'd never be dependent on anyone again. "Mom thinks I don't know she's loaded," Jessica laughed, but there was no warmth in it. "But I found some old bank statements in her desk last month when I was looking for her insurance papers. Marcus, we're talking millions."
Millions.
And here I am, struggling to make ends meet in that tiny apartment while she lives in this mansion all alone. The misting bottle slipped from my fingers, hitting the concrete floor with a sharp crack.
Millions.
She'd been snooping through my private papers. The violation cut deeper than any physical wound. "Well, she won't live forever." Marcus's voice came through the speakerphone, cold and calculating. "And you're her only heir. Be patient, babe. Maybe start dropping some hints about how we could help her manage her finances. Old people get confused about money all the time." I backed away from the door, my hands shaking. This was my daughter, the little girl I'd held through countless nightmares, the teenager I'd worked myself to exhaustion to put through college, the young woman whose wedding I'd paid for when Marcus's family couldn't afford it. This was my Jessica, plotting to manipulate me for money I'd never even told her I had. The conversation continued, each word like acid poured into an open wound. "You know what would be perfect?" Jessica's voice brightened with cruel inspiration. "If we could convince her to move into one of those senior living places. Assisted living, memory care, whatever. We could tell her it's for her own safety. Old people fall all the time, right? Break their hips, forget to turn off the stove. It would be the responsible thing to do."
Brilliant, Marcus agreed.
"And then we could move into the house temporarily, to maintain it and keep it safe until we're ready to sell. Or maybe we just keep it," Jessica mused. "This neighborhood is only going to get more expensive. It could be our family home." Their family home. The home I'd bought with my tears, sweat, and determination. The home where I'd nursed Jessica through chicken pox, helped her with homework at the kitchen table, celebrated her achievements, and comforted her heartbreaks. I stumbled back to my orchids, but their beauty seemed muted now, gray around the edges like everything else in my suddenly uncertain world. How long had Jessica been thinking this way? How long had she seen me not as her mother, but as an obstacle between her and what she considered rightfully hers? That evening, Jessica and Marcus joined me for dinner, as they did every Tuesday. A tradition I'd started after they married, thinking it would keep our family close. Now I understood it for what it really was: reconnaissance missions. "Mom, you seem distracted tonight," Jessica said, cutting her pot roast with surgical precision. "Are you feeling all right? You've been forgetting things lately." I looked up sharply. "I haven't forgotten anything." "Well, you did leave the front door unlocked twice last week," Marcus chimed in, his tone concerned but his eyes calculating. "And Jessica mentioned you couldn't remember where you put your car keys yesterday." That was a lie. I always kept my keys in the same bowl by the front door, and I never left the house unlocked. But I could see where this was going, the beginning of a carefully constructed narrative about my declining mental faculties. "I'm fine," I said firmly. "My mind is as sharp as ever." Jessica exchanged a look with Marcus, one of those meaningful glances that excluded me completely. "Of course you are, Mom. We're just worried about you, that's all. This house is so big, and you're here all alone. What if something happened? What if you fell and no one found you for days?" "I have my emergency alert system," I reminded her. "Those things don't always work," Marcus said, leaning forward with feigned earnestness. "And they can't prevent accidents. Maybe we should start looking into some options, places where you'd have people around to help if you need it." There it was, the opening gambit of their campaign to warehouse me so they could claim my home and my money. I set down my fork carefully, buying time to think. "What kind of places?" "Oh, just some really nice senior communities," Jessica said quickly. "Places with activities and social interaction." "You're so isolated here, Mom. When's the last time you made a new friend?" "Actually, I had several friends from my investment club, my gardening society, and my book club, but I never mentioned them to Jessica. Now I was glad I'd kept that part of my life private. "I'll think about it," I said, knowing I needed to be careful. If they suspected I was onto their scheme, they might accelerate their timeline. After they left, I sat in my living room. My beautiful living room with its Persian rugs and antique piano, its walls lined with first-edition books and original artwork I'd collected over the years, and felt like a stranger in my own home. Everything I'd worked for, everything I'd built, was under siege by the two people I'd trusted most. That night, I couldn't sleep. I walked through my house, really looking at it for the first time in years. The original hardwood floors I'd refinished myself. The crown molding I'd painstakingly restored. The custom kitchen where I'd cooked thousands of meals. The master suite where I'd retreated to cry after Jessica's father left, where I'd celebrated every small victory in my journey toward financial independence. This wasn't just a house. It was my life's work, my sanctuary, my proof that a woman alone could not just survive but thrive. And my own daughter wanted to take it away from me. I made a decision that night, standing in my moonlit kitchen with my hands wrapped around a cup of tea. If Jessica and Marcus wanted to play games, I would play along. But they had no idea who they were really dealing with. They saw a lonely old woman, easily manipulated and discarded. They were about to discover that Carmen Aniston hadn't built a fortune by being weak or naive. The next morning, I called my attorney, my financial advisor, and my accountant. It was time to make some changes, strategic changes that would protect everything I'd worked for while teaching my daughter and her husband a lesson they'd never forget. After all, I'd learned long ago that the best revenge isn't served cold. It's served with compound interest. The transformation began immediately. I became the perfect target, the ideal victim they thought I was. It was Oscar-worthy acting, really, playing confused when I'd never been sharper, acting frail when I felt stronger than I had in years, pretending to be financially naive when I could calculate compound interest in my head faster than Marcus could use his phone calculator. Jessica, dear, I said during our next Tuesday dinner, letting my voice quaver just slightly.
I've been thinking about what you said.
About those senior communities. Her fork paused halfway to her mouth, and I caught the flash of excitement in her eyes before she schooled her expression into one of loving concern. Really, Mom? I'm so glad you're considering it. It would give Marcus and me such peace of mind knowing you were safe and had people around. But I'm worried about the cost, I continued, wringing my hands in what I hoped looked like anxiety. I don't have much money, you know. Just my Social Security and that small pension from the insurance company. This was the moment of truth. Would Jessica reveal that she knew about my real financial situation? Would honesty prevail over greed? Oh, don't worry about the money, Mom, she said smoothly. These places have financial assistance programs. And, if necessary, we could always sell the house to help cover the costs. There it was. The lie wrapped in concern, the theft disguised as sacrifice. My heart broke a little more, but my resolve hardened like steel. Sell the house. I made my voice small, frightened. But this is my home. Where would you and Marcus live? Well, Jessica exchanged another one of those looks with her husband. We've been thinking. Maybe we could move in here temporarily, just to maintain the property and make sure everything stays in good condition. You know, until the market is right for selling. Marcus nodded solemnly. It would be our honor to take care of your home, Carmen. Make sure it's preserved exactly as you'd want it. Preserved. As if I were already dead. That's so thoughtful of you both, I said, reaching across to pat Jessica's hand. I don't know what I'd do without you. The words tasted like ash in my mouth, but they had the desired effect. Jessica's smile was radiant with triumph, and Marcus actually rubbed his hands together under the table. They thought they'd won. Over the following weeks, I played my part perfectly. I forgot appointments I'd never made. I left lights on and claimed I couldn't remember doing it. I asked the same question twice in conversation, and then looked confused when they pointed it out. Every instance was carefully calculated, designed to build their case for my incompetence. Meanwhile, I was busier than I'd been in years. My real activities took place during the day, while Jessica was at her job as a hotel manager and Marcus was at his insurance office. I met with my team of advisors, restructuring my investments, setting up trusts, and making arrangements that would protect my assets while ensuring my daughter learned the hardest lesson of her life. My attorney, Harold Fitzpatrick, was initially skeptical of my plan. Carmen, are you absolutely sure about this? Disinheriting your only child is a significant step.
People change.
Maybe if you talked to Jessica directly? Harold, I interrupted, I've had 49 years to know my daughter. This isn't a phase or a mistake. This is who she is, and I need to accept that. More importantly, I need to make sure she doesn't destroy other people the way she's trying to destroy me. He studied my face for a long moment, then nodded. You're one of the strongest women I know, Carmen. If this is what you want, I'll make sure it's legally bulletproof. My financial advisor, Margaret Chen, was more supportive. She'd seen too many elderly clients taken advantage of by their own families. Your portfolio is structured beautifully, she said during one of our meetings. Even if they somehow gained access to your accounts, the way we've set things up would prevent any major damage. But are you sure you want to go through with the rest of your plan? It's quite elaborate. Margaret, my daughter is trying to steal my life from me while I'm still living it. Elaborate is exactly what the situation calls for. The most crucial meeting was with Dr. Patricia Williams, a geriatric psychiatrist I'd known through my book club. I needed her professional assessment to be ironclad when the time came. Carmen, I've administered every cognitive test we have. she said after our third session. Your mental acuity is remarkable for someone of any age, let alone 75. Your memory, reasoning, and decision-making capabilities are all well above average. If anyone tries to claim you're suffering from dementia or diminished capacity, this documentation will prove otherwise. And you'll testify to that if necessary? Absolutely. What your daughter is attempting to do is elder abuse, plain and simple. I'll do whatever I can to help you protect yourself. Armed with legal protections and professional documentation, I began phase 2 of my plan, giving Jessica exactly what she thought she wanted, while ensuring she'd never actually get it. I started leaving real estate brochures around the house, glossy pamphlets for Sunny Acres Assisted Living and Golden Years Manor. I made sure Jessica found them, crumpled and tear-stained, in my wastebasket. "Mom, were you looking at these?" she asked one evening, holding up the brochures with carefully modulated concern. "I'm just so scared," I whispered, letting my eyes fill with tears. "I don't want to leave my home, but maybe you're right. Maybe I'm not safe here anymore." "Oh, Mom." Jessica wrapped her arms around me, and for a moment, I almost believed her concern was genuine. "It's going to be okay. We'll find somewhere beautiful, somewhere you'll be happy." But over her shoulder, I caught Marcus making a silent yes gesture with his fist, and any lingering doubt evaporated. "There's just one thing," I said, pulling back to look at Jessica. "I'm worried about my finances. I don't understand all those investment papers and bank statements. Could you help me organize everything?" This was the bait. Jessica had already been through my desk once. Now I was giving her permission to do it legally. "Of course, Mom. Marcus is really good with financial stuff too. We could help you get everything sorted out." "That would be wonderful. All those papers are so confusing. Sometimes I think I might have more money than I remember, but then I look at all those numbers and get so overwhelmed." Hook, line, and sinker. Jessica's eyes lit up like Christmas morning. That weekend, they arrived with folders and calculators, ready to help me organize my finances. I watched them work, cataloging my assets, adding up my accounts, practically salivating over the numbers they found. "Mom," Jessica said carefully, "you have quite a bit more money than you thought. These investment accounts, some of them are worth hundreds of thousands of dollars." I gasped and clutched my chest. That can't be right. I'm just a simple woman with a pension. "No, look." Marcus spread the statements across my dining room table. "You've got accounts with Vanguard, Fidelity, Charles Schwab. Mom, you're actually quite wealthy." "But I don't understand any of this," I protested. "What does it all mean?" "It means you don't have to worry about affording the best care possible," Jessica said, her voice honey-sweet. "We can find you a really nice place, somewhere luxurious, and you'll still have plenty left over. But who will manage all this money when I'm in the home? I can't possibly understand all these complicated investments." Another meaningful look passed between them. "We could help," Marcus said carefully. "If you wanted, we could take over managing your portfolio. Make sure everything stays safe and grows properly." "Would you?" "Oh, that would be such a relief. I trust you both completely." The trap was set. Now I just had to wait for them to walk into it. Over the next month, Jessica and Marcus became increasingly bold. They started making appointments for me at senior living facilities, without asking. They hired a real estate agent to give them a preliminary assessment of my house's value. They even went so far as to research power of attorney documents, thinking I wouldn't understand what they were doing. But I understood everything, and I was documenting everything. Every conversation was recorded on the digital recorder I kept in my pocket. Every document they prepared was photographed. Every lie they told was cataloged. I was building a case that would not only protect me, but expose them for exactly what they were. The most heartbreaking moment came when I overheard Jessica on the phone with someone, presumably a friend, describing her sacrifice in caring for her declining mother. She's getting so difficult, Jessica sighed dramatically. Yesterday, she put salt in her coffee instead of sugar and insisted it tasted fine. And she keeps asking me the same questions over and over. It's really taking a toll on Marcus and me, but what choice do we have? She's family. I had put salt in my coffee on purpose, to add to her narrative of my incompetence. I'd asked her repeated questions by design, but hearing her use my calculated confusion as evidence of her own victimhood was almost more than I could bear. That night, I stood in my walk-in closet, looking at the clothes I'd accumulated over the years. Most of them were modest, unremarkable, the wardrobe of a woman who'd learned to blend in, to not draw attention to her success. But in the back, wrapped in protective covers, were the beautiful things I'd bought myself over the years, but rarely worn. Designer dresses, elegant jewelry, expensive shoes. It was time for Carmen Aniston to stop hiding. Tomorrow, I would begin the final phase of my plan. Tomorrow, Jessica and Marcus would discover that they hadn't been manipulating a confused old woman. They'd been dancing with a master. The Tesla dealership gleamed like a temple to modern technology, all glass and chrome and sleek lines that promise speed and luxury. I'd driven past it hundreds of times over the years, never once considering that someone like me might belong inside. But today was different. Today, I wasn't the modest widow in sensible shoes and discount store cardigans. Today, I was Carmen Aniston, millionaire investor, and I was ready to make a statement. I'd spent hours preparing for this moment. My silver hair was styled in a sophisticated cut that took 20 years off my appearance. I wore a tailored Armani suit in deep navy blue, one of the beautiful pieces I'd kept hidden in my closet for years. My jewelry was understated but expensive. Pearl earrings, a Cartier watch, a simple gold chain that cost more than most people's monthly salary. But the most important change wasn't visible. It was the way I carried myself. Straight-shouldered, confident, with the bearing of a woman who'd built an empire and wasn't afraid to show it. The young salesman who approached me clearly didn't know what to make of me. His name tag read Tyler, and he looked like he was fresh out of college, all enthusiasm and uncertainty. "Good morning, ma'am. How can I help you today?" "I'm interested in purchasing a Tesla," I said simply. "The Model S Plaid specifically. In red." Tyler's eyebrows shot up. The Model S Plaid was their top-of-the-line vehicle, with a price tag that made most people gulp. "Of course. Would you like to see one? We have a beautiful red one right here on the showroom floor." He led me to the car, and I felt my breath catch. It was stunning, sleek and powerful, with lines that suggested barely contained energy. The red paint job was like liquid fire, and the interior was a masterpiece of leather and technology. "She's beautiful," I murmured, running my hand along the perfect curve of the hood. "Would you like to sit inside?" Tyler asked. "Experience the interior?" I slipped into the driver's seat, and it was like coming home. The car seemed to wrap around me, every control within perfect reach, every surface designed for both comfort and performance. This wasn't just transportation. This was freedom, power, and possibility all rolled into one magnificent machine. "What's the price?" I asked, though I already knew from my research. Tyler quoted a figure that would make most people's heads spin, $140,000 fully loaded with all the premium features. But I just nodded calmly. "And how long would delivery take?" "Well, for the specific configuration you mentioned, probably about 6 to 8 weeks. "I need it today," I interrupted. Tyler blinked. "Today?" "Ma'am, I'm not sure that's possible. We don't usually have fully loaded plaids in stock, and even if we did." "Is this one available?" I nodded toward the red beauty I was sitting in. "This is our showroom model, but theoretically, I'd have to check with my manager." "Please do." Tyler hurried away, and I allowed myself a small smile. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, I could see the parking lot where I'd left my old Honda. The modest, practical car that had served me well for 15 years, but no longer reflected who I truly was. Mrs. Aniston? Tyler had returned with an older man in an expensive suit. "This is my manager, David Richardson." David stepped forward with a kind of smile reserved for serious customers. "Mrs. Aniston, Tyler tells me you're interested in our showroom model." "That's certainly possible, though there would be an additional fee for the immediate availability, and we'd need to arrange financing." "No financing necessary," I said, opening my purse and pulling out my checkbook. "I'll pay in full." The silence that followed was profound. David and Tyler exchanged glances, and I could practically see them recalculating their entire approach to this interaction. "You want to pay cash for a $140,000 vehicle?" David asked carefully. "Is that a problem?" "No, no problem at all. It's just unusual. Most customers prefer to finance, even when they have the capital available. Tax advantages, you understand." "I prefer simplicity," I said. "Cash is simple."
And it was.
After decades of careful investing, compound interest, and strategic planning, $140,000 was less than what my portfolio gained in a typical month. This purchase wouldn't even register as a blip in my overall financial picture. "Well then," David rubbed his hands together, his smile genuine now. "Let's get the paperwork started. Tyler, pull the vehicle history for the showroom model and start preparing the sales contract." As they bustled around me, handling the details of registration and insurance, I felt a thrill of anticipation. This wasn't just about buying a car. This was about timing. Jessica and Marcus had mentioned they were planning to visit me this afternoon to discuss their latest discoveries about my financial situation. They thought they were coming to manipulate a confused old woman. Instead, they were about to witness the first act of my revenge. The paperwork took 2 hours. David handled everything personally, clearly recognizing that a customer who could write a 6-figure check without blinking was worth his full attention. They detailed the car, programmed my phone to the system, and gave me a complete tutorial on all the features. "Mrs. Aniston," David said as he handed me the keys, "I have to say, in 20 years of selling luxury vehicles, I've rarely met someone who approaches a purchase with such confidence and clarity. This car is perfect for you." "Thank you, David. I have a feeling this is going to be exactly what I need." I drove home slowly, savoring every moment. The Tesla was whisper quiet but thrummed with barely contained power. The acceleration was intoxicating, the handling precise and responsive. For the first time in years, I felt truly alive behind the wheel. When I pulled into my driveway, Mrs. Henderson from next door was watering her garden. She did a double take when she saw me emerge from the sleek red car, her mouth falling open in surprise. "Carmen, is that your car?" "It is indeed, Helen." I smiled and gave a little wave. "Beautiful day, isn't it?" I could practically see the gossip wheels turning in her head. By evening, the entire neighborhood would know that quiet, modest Carmen Aniston had bought herself a Tesla. The news would spread like wildfire, reaching Jessica and Marcus long before they arrived for our scheduled meeting. I parked the Tesla prominently in my circular driveway, where it couldn't be missed, then went inside to prepare for the performance of my lifetime. At 3 o'clock sharp, I heard the familiar sound of Jessica's car in the driveway. Then silence. A long silence. I imagined them sitting there, staring at my new Tesla, trying to process what they were seeing. Finally, the car door slammed, and I heard Jessica's voice, sharp with confusion. "What the hell is that thing doing in Mom's driveway?" I positioned myself in my living room where I could see them approaching through my front window. Jessica looked incredulous, Marcus appeared calculating, and both of them kept glancing back at the Tesla as if it might disappear if they looked away. The doorbell rang, and I waited a beat before answering. wanting to appear surprised by their arrival. Jessica. Marcus. How lovely to see you. Mom. Jessica pushed past me into the living room. Whose car is that in your driveway?
Car.
I blinked innocently. Oh, you mean my Tesla? Isn't it beautiful? Your Tesla? Marcus's voice cracked slightly. Mom, that car costs more than most people make in 2 years.
Does it? I wouldn't know about that.
I just like the color. Jessica grabbed my arm, her grip tight enough to bruise. Mom, where did you get the money for a Tesla? This was the moment I'd been waiting for. The moment when their careful facade would crack, when their true priorities would show. Money. I tilted my head, playing confused. What do you mean? I mean, Jessica's voice was rising, that car costs over $100,000. You can't afford a car like that on Social Security. Can't I? I looked genuinely puzzled. But I bought it. So, I must be able to afford it. Marcus stepped forward, his face flushed. Carmen, be serious. Where did the money come from? Did you take out a loan? Did someone convince you to sign something? The beautiful irony of his question wasn't lost on me. He was asking if someone had manipulated me into a financial decision. Exactly what he and Jessica had been trying to do for months. I used my checkbook, I said simply. The same way I always buy things. Your checkbook? Jessica looked like she might faint. Mom, what checkbook? You don't have that kind of money in your checking account. Don't I? I went to my purse and pulled out my bank statements, not the modest checking account statements they'd seen before, but the statements from my primary investment account. I think you might be mistaken, dear. Jessica snatched the papers from my hands, her eyes scanning the numbers. I watched her face go through a progression of emotions, confusion, understanding, and finally, rage. This can't be right, she whispered. This says you have. This says. $12.7 million, I finished helpfully. Give or take a few $100,000, depending on market fluctuations. The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus reached for the nearest chair and sat down heavily. Jessica just stared at the bank statement as if it were written in a foreign language. 12 million. Marcus's voice was barely audible. Well, that's just one account, I said cheerfully. I have several others. Would you like to see those statements too? Jessica's face had gone from pale to red to a mottled purple. You've had this money all along? All this time, while we've been worried about your finances, while we've been trying to help you plan for your future, you've been sitting on millions of dollars. Sitting on them? I laughed, the sound light and genuinely amused. Oh, my dear, I haven't been sitting on anything. I've been growing them. Investing, diversifying, building wealth while you two have been planning to steal what you thought was there. The words hit them like physical blows. Marcus actually flinched, and Jessica took a step backward. Steal? Jessica's voice was shrill. We weren't trying to steal anything. We were trying to help you. Help me? I moved to the window and looked out at my beautiful new Tesla. By convincing me I was incompetent? By trying to put me in a nursing home? By planning to move into my house and sell it for profit? Marcus stood up abruptly. We never. Oh, but you did. I turned back to face them, and for the first time in months, I let them see the real me. The sharp, intelligent, utterly aware woman who'd been watching their every move. I know exactly what you've been planning. I've known from the beginning. Jessica's eyes widened as the implications sank in. You've been pretending? All those times you seemed confused when you forgot things. Academy Award worthy, wasn't it? I smiled coldly. I gave you exactly the performance you needed to justify your actions to yourselves. But why? Marcus looked genuinely bewildered. Why would you do that? Because I needed to know who you really were. Both of you. I needed to see how far you'd go, how much you'd be willing to betray me for money. I sat down in my favorite chair, the one that faced the window where my Tesla gleamed in the afternoon sun. And now I know. Jessica moved toward me, her hands outstretched in supplication.
Mom, please.
You have to understand. We were genuinely worried about you. The big house, living alone, we thought. You thought I was a weak, confused old woman whose death would make you rich, I interrupted. And when that seemed to be taking too long, you decided to warehouse me somewhere convenient while you enjoyed the fruits of my labor. The brutal honesty of it hung in the air like smoke. Neither of them could deny it, because every word was true. So what happens now? Marcus asked quietly. I stood up and walked to my desk, pulling out a thick manila folder. Now you learn about consequences. I handed Jessica the folder. Inside were copies of all my recordings, transcripts of their conversations, photographs of the documents they'd prepared without my knowledge, and evidence of every lie they'd told and every manipulation they'd attempted. This is going to my attorney tomorrow, I said as Jessica's hand shook while she read. Along with documentation of your attempted elder abuse and fraud. Fraud? Marcus stepped forward. We never took any money. Only because you didn't have the chance. Intent is enough. I returned to my chair, suddenly feeling tired. Not confused or weak, just tired of pretending to love people who saw me as nothing more than a payday. Mom, Jessica's voice was small now, defeated. We can work this out. We can fix this. I looked at my daughter, really looked at her. I saw the little girl who used to climb into my bed during thunderstorms, the teenager who'd cried on my shoulder over broken hearts, the young woman who'd asked me to walk her down the aisle because she didn't want anyone else to give her away. But I also saw the woman who'd been willing to sacrifice my autonomy, my dignity, and my happiness for money, who'd planned to put me away like an inconvenient piece of furniture while she enjoyed the life I'd built. No, Jessica, I said softly. Some things can't be fixed. Some betrayals are too deep. I stood up and walked to the front door, opening it wide. I think it's time for you both to leave. You're no longer welcome in my home. They stood there for a moment, clearly struggling to process this reversal of fortune. Jessica opened her mouth as if to argue, but something in my expression must have warned her off. As they walked to their car, I called out one final message. Oh, and Jessica? You might want to start looking for a new place to live. I'll be putting the family house on the market next week. I watched them drive away, then closed the door and leaned against it. The silence in my house felt different now, not lonely, but peaceful.
Clean.
I walked to the window and looked out at my Tesla again. Tomorrow, I would drive it for the first time as a completely free woman. Free from the expectations of ungrateful children, free from the need to pretend to be less than I was, free to finally live the life I'd earned. But first, I had some phone calls to make. My attorney needed to know about the new evidence. My financial advisor needed to discuss some charitable giving opportunities. And I needed to make reservations for the European vacation I'd been putting off for decades. After all, I had a fortune to spend and a future to enjoy. And for the first time in months, that future looked absolutely brilliant. The next morning dawned crisp and clear, perfect Tesla weather. I'd barely finished my first cup of coffee when my phone started ringing. It was Margaret Chen, my financial advisor, and she sounded amused. Carmen, I just got a very interesting call from someone claiming to be your daughter. She wanted to discuss your recent erratic financial behavior and suggested that perhaps I should be concerned about your mental state. I laughed, settling into my kitchen chair with a cordless phone. And what did you tell her? I told her that you're one of the most financially astute clients I've ever had, and that any changes to your accounts would need to come directly from you, in person, with proper documentation of your mental capacity. Margaret paused. She didn't take that well. I imagine not. What did she say? She accused me of taking advantage of an elderly woman with dementia. I informed her that you'd recently passed comprehensive cognitive testing with flying colors, and that if she continued to make defamatory statements about my business practices, I'd be consulting with my attorney. Good for you, Margaret. I'm sorry you had to deal with that. Don't be. I've seen this before. Family members who suddenly become concerned when they realize there's more money involved than they expected. The fact that she called me at all tells me everything I need to know about her motives. After I hung up, the phone rang again almost immediately. This time it was Harold Fitzpatrick, my attorney. Carmen, I've received some very disturbing communications from your daughter and son-in-law. They're claiming you're being manipulated by unscrupulous financial advisors and that you've made recent purchases that demonstrate diminished capacity. The Tesla? I asked. Among other things. They've demanded I provide them with copies of your will and any powers of attorney you may have granted. I, of course, told them that's not how attorney-client privilege works. I could picture Harold in his downtown office, surrounded by law books and case files, dealing with my family's increasingly desperate attempts to access my money. They also suggested that if you're truly competent, you should have no problem meeting with them and a neutral party to discuss your finances, Harold continued. They've proposed bringing in their own financial advisor to review your portfolio. How thoughtful of them, I said dryly. And what did you tell them? I told them that you're under no obligation to justify your financial decisions to anyone and that their attempts to circumvent proper legal channels were concerning. I also mentioned that attempted elder abuse is a serious crime in this state. How did they respond to that? Marcus hung up on me. Jessica sent a nasty email about how she's trying to protect you from people who are obviously taking advantage of your mental decline. I sipped my coffee, feeling remarkably calm despite the chaos swirling around me. Harold, I think it's time to accelerate our timeline. Can you have the new will ready by this afternoon? Already prepared. I'll need you to come in at 2 o'clock with 2 witnesses who aren't beneficiaries. Perfect. And Harold, make sure to document everything Jessica and Marcus have said and done. I have a feeling we're going to need it. After breakfast, I dressed carefully in another of my hidden treasures, a Carolina Herrera dress in emerald green that brought out my eyes and made me look at least a decade younger. I paired it with matching shoes and a handbag that cost more than most people's monthly rent. It was time for phase 2 of my revelation. I drove my Tesla to the Willowbrook Country Club, where I'd been a member for 15 years, but rarely used the facilities. Jessica didn't even know I belonged, another aspect of my life I'd kept private. The club was the kind of place where Birmingham's old money gathered, where business deals were made over golf and charity galas planned over champagne lunches. The valet who took my keys did a double take when he saw me emerge from the Tesla. Mrs. Aniston? I almost didn't recognize you. Beautiful car. Thank you, James. Is the dining room busy today? Not too crowded for lunch. Would you like your usual table by the window? I smiled, realizing that even here, people had seen me as background furniture for years. Actually, I'd prefer something more central today. Somewhere with better visibility. James led me to a table in the heart of the dining room, where I had a perfect view of the entire space and, more importantly, where everyone could see me. Word of my Tesla purchase had clearly preceded me. I caught whispered conversations and sideways glances from other members. I ordered the salmon and a glass of Chablis, then settled into wait. I didn't have to wait long. Carmen Aniston? My goodness, is that really you? I looked up to see Vivian Ashworth, the president of the club's board of directors and one of Birmingham's most prominent socialites. She was staring at me with undisguised amazement. Hello, Vivian. How lovely to see you. Carmen, you look absolutely stunning. I hardly recognized you. Vivian's eyes took in my expensive dress, my perfect hair, the subtle but unmistakable signs of wealth I was no longer hiding. May I join you? Please do. Vivian settled into the chair across from me, her curiosity practically radiating off her in waves. I heard the most interesting rumor about you this morning. Something about a red Tesla? Not a rumor, I smiled. Would you like to see it? It's parked right outside. You actually bought a Tesla? Carmen, well, it's wonderful. But how? I mean, she struggled for a polite way to ask about my finances. How can I afford it? I helped her out. Let's just say I've been more successful with my investments than most people realized. Vivian's eyes widened. Investments? Carmen, I had no idea you were involved in the markets. For over 30 years now. I started small, but compound interest is a beautiful thing. My God. Vivian leaned forward conspiratorially. How successful are we talking about? If you don't mind me asking. I didn't mind at all. In fact, this was exactly why I'd chosen to have lunch here today. 8 figures, I said quietly. Vivian's fork clattered to her plate. 8 figures? Carmen, you're a multi-millionaire. Several times over. The conversation at nearby tables had quieted, and I could feel ears straining to catch our words. Perfect. But why have you kept this secret all these years? Vivian asked. You could have been traveling, living in luxury, buying art, supporting causes you care about. I am now, I said simply. I've decided it's time to start living the life I can afford. What changed your mind? I took a sip of wine, considering how much to reveal. Let's just say I had a revelation about the people I thought I could trust with the truth. Vivian was sharp enough to read between the lines. Family troubles? You could say that. She reached across the table and patted my hand. Carmen, I'm so sorry. But I'm also excited for you. A woman of your means should be enjoying herself, not hiding her light under a bushel. That's exactly what I intend to do. By the time I left the country club, the news of my wealth had spread through Birmingham's social elite like wildfire. I could practically feel the shift in how people looked at me, no longer the quiet, modest widow, but a woman of substance and mystery. My phone was ringing when I got back to my Tesla. It was Jessica, and she sounded frantic. Mom, I just got a call from Mrs. Patterson. She said she heard you were at the country club bragging about being a millionaire. Please tell me that's not true. Which part? I asked innocently. That I was at the country club, or that I'm a millionaire?
Both.
All of it. Mom, what's gotten into you? This isn't like you at all. Actually, Jessica, this is exactly like me. This is who I've always been. I just stopped pretending to be someone else. But why? Why did you hide this from me? I'm your daughter. The hurt in her voice might have moved me yesterday. Today, it just sounded like more manipulation. Because I wanted to see who you really were when you thought I had nothing to offer you except an inheritance someday. Silence stretched between us, filled with years of unspoken truths and recent betrayals. And what did you discover? Jessica's voice was barely a whisper. That my daughter is willing to warehouse her mother in a nursing home to get her hands on what she thinks is rightfully hers. Mom, please. Can we meet? Can we talk about this properly? We did talk about it properly. Yesterday. When I kicked you out of my house. But we can fix this. We can. Jessica, listen to me very carefully. I am 75 years old, and I have more money than I can spend in whatever time I have left. I am not confused, incompetent, or in need of your protection. I am also not a bank account with legs that exists solely for your convenience. I could hear her crying on the other end of the line, but I felt nothing. The tears she was shedding now were for herself, not for me. I'm going to live my life exactly as I choose, I continued. I'm going to buy beautiful things, travel to amazing places, and support causes I care about. And I'm going to do it all without input from people who see me as an obstacle to their inheritance. You're going to cut me out completely? Jessica's voice cracked. I'm your only child. You cut yourself out the moment you decided I was more valuable to you in a nursing home than in my own house. I hung up the phone and sat in my Tesla for a moment, looking at the house I'd called home for over 4 decades. It was beautiful, filled with memories both good and bad. But it was also tainted now by Jessica and Marcus's greed, by their willingness to sacrifice my dignity for their gain. It was time for a fresh start. That afternoon, I met with Harold at his office to sign my new will. The documents were straightforward. Jessica would receive the minimum required by law, enough to ensure she couldn't contest the will successfully. The rest of my estate would go to carefully chosen charities, women's shelters, literacy programs, organizations that helped elderly people maintain their independence. Are you absolutely certain about this, Carmen? Harold asked as I signed the final page. This represents a significant change from your previous will. I've never been more certain of anything in my life, I replied. Actions have consequences, Harold. It's time my daughter learned that lesson. As I drove home in my Tesla, I felt lighter than I had in years. The sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink that seemed to reflect off my car's red paint like fire. Tomorrow, I would call a real estate agent about listing the house. I would also call a travel agent about that European vacation I'd been postponing. Maybe I'd rent a villa in Tuscany, or take a river cruise through Germany, or spend a month in Paris learning to cook at Le Cordon Bleu. The possibilities were endless, and for the first time in years, so was my future. I pulled into my driveway and sat for a moment, looking at the house where I'd raised Jessica, where I'd built my fortune in secret, where I'd learned the hardest lesson of my life about the difference between being loved and being useful. My phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Marcus. Carmen, please reconsider. Jessica is heartbroken. We can work this out as a family. I deleted the message without responding. I'd wasted enough time on people who only saw me as a means to an end. It was time to start living for myself. 3 weeks after my revelation, I was sitting in the offices of Pemberton and Associates, Birmingham's most prestigious real estate agency, when my phone rang. The caller ID showed Jessica's number, the 15th time she'd called today. I declined the call and turned my attention back to Patricia Pemberton, the agency's founder, and the woman who'd just told me my house was worth even more than I'd expected. The market in your neighborhood has absolutely exploded, Patricia was saying, her perfectly manicured fingers dancing across her tablet. Properties like yours, historic, well-maintained, on large lots, they're going for premium prices. I'd conservatively estimate $2.8 million, possibly more if we get multiple offers. I nodded, unsurprised. I'd been tracking real estate values in my area for years, part of my overall investment strategy. How quickly can we list it? I can have a photographer out tomorrow, and we could be on the market by Friday. With a property like this, I expect we'll have offers within the first week. My phone rang again. Jessica, again. This time, I answered.
What?
I said without preamble. Mom, thank God. I've been trying to reach you all day. We need to talk. We've talked. I thought I was quite clear. Please just give me 5 minutes. There are things you don't understand. Jessica, I understand perfectly. You and Marcus decided I was a confused old woman whose money would be better managed by you. When you realized how much money was actually involved, you panicked. Now you're trying to control your way back into my good graces and my will. Patricia raised an eyebrow but continued working on her tablet, pretending not to listen to what was obviously a very personal conversation. That's not. Mom, it's not that simple. Marcus has been under a lot of pressure at work, and we have debts you don't know about. We were scared, and maybe we made some bad decisions, but we never meant to hurt you. Bad decisions? I laughed, and the sound was bitter even to my own ears. Jessica, you researched nursing homes. You contacted my financial advisors. You prepared legal documents to take control of my assets. Those weren't bad decisions made in a moment of panic. Those were calculated, premeditated actions. Silence on the other end of the line, then. How did you know about the legal documents? Because I've been documenting everything you've done since the beginning. Every phone call, every meeting, every lie you've told. More silence. Then, in a smaller voice. You recorded us? I protected myself from people who were trying to steal my life from me. We weren't trying to steal. Jessica, stop. Just stop. I'm listing the house this week. I'm moving to a luxury apartment downtown. And I'm living my life without input from people who see me as an ATM with a pulse. I hung up before she could respond and turned back to Patricia, who was watching me with undisguised interest. Family troubles? She asked diplomatically. You could say that. I straightened my shoulders and refocused on the business at hand. Now, about the listing. I want it priced aggressively. I'm not looking to maximize profit. I want a quick sale. How quick? 30 days, or less if possible. Patricia's eyes lit up. A motivated seller with a premium property was every real estate agent's dream. We can definitely make that happen. Are you planning to stay in Birmingham? For now. I've purchased a penthouse at River Towers downtown, but I'm also considering spending several months a year traveling. How wonderful! Patricia's enthusiasm was genuine. You know, I've handled estate sales for several clients over the years, helping them downsize and simplify. It can be very liberating. That's exactly what I'm hoping for. As I drove home in my Tesla, I reflected on how much my life had changed in just 3 weeks. The quiet, modest existence I'd maintained for decades was completely gone, replaced by something bolder and more authentic. I'd joined the River Towers Fitness Center and discovered I actually enjoyed swimming laps in their Olympic-sized pool. I'd started taking art classes at the Birmingham Museum, something I'd always wanted to do, but never allowed myself the time for. I'd even hired a personal shopper to help me build a wardrobe that reflected my true financial status rather than the careful camouflage I'd worn for years. Most importantly, I'd stopped pretending to be less than I was. My phone rang as I pulled into my driveway. Harold Fitzpatrick this time. Carmen, we need to talk. I've received a very disturbing letter from an attorney representing Jessica and Marcus. What kind of letter? They're threatening to contest your mental competency. They're claiming that your recent behavior, the car purchase, the decision to sell your house, your new lifestyle, all indicate diminished capacity or undue influence from your financial advisors. I felt a chill run down my spine. Can they do that? They can try. It would involve petitioning the court for a competency hearing, bringing in medical experts, possibly appointing a guardian ad litem to represent your interests. And if they succeeded? If a court declared you incompetent, Jessica would likely be appointed as your guardian with control over your finances and medical decisions. The audacity of it took my breath away. Not content with trying to manipulate me into giving them what they wanted, they were now attempting to have me legally declared incompetent so they could take it by force. Harold, what do we need to do? First, don't panic. They have a very weak case. You've recently passed comprehensive cognitive testing with Dr. Williams. Your financial decisions, while perhaps surprising to people who didn't know your true net worth, are all well within reason for someone of your means. Your new lifestyle isn't evidence of incompetence. It's evidence of someone finally living the life they can afford. But the process itself
Could be unpleasant, yes.
even if we win, which I'm confident we would, it would involve court appearances, testimony from family members, possibly intrusive medical examinations. I thought about this for a moment. Jessica and Marcus were escalating their campaign, moving from manipulation to legal coercion. They were betting that I'd back down rather than face the humiliation and stress of a competency hearing. They were about to discover how badly they'd miscalculated. Harold, I want you to do something for me. Of course. I want you to schedule a comprehensive competency evaluation with Dr. Williams and any other experts you think would be helpful. I want documentation that's so thorough and unassailable that any judge would laugh Jessica's attorney out of court. That's actually an excellent strategy. Preemptive documentation. And I want you to investigate the possibility of filing a restraining order against Jessica and Marcus for harassment and attempted elder abuse. Harold was quiet for a moment. Carmen, that's a significant escalation. Are you sure you want to go that route? They chose to escalate this into a legal battle. I'm simply going to make sure I win it decisively. All right. I'll start making the necessary arrangements. But Carmen. Yes. Once we go down this path, there's no going back. Your relationship with Jessica will be irreparably damaged. I looked at my beautiful house, the home where I'd raised the daughter, who is now trying to have me declared legally incompetent so she could steal my money. It's already irreparably damaged, Harold. Now I'm just going to make sure she can't do this to me or anyone else. That evening, I called Dr. Williams and explained the situation. She was appalled. Carmen, this is exactly the kind of elder abuse I see too often in my practice. Adult children who become concerned about their parents' mental state when money is involved. Can you help me? Absolutely. I'll schedule you for a complete neuropsychological evaluation, cognitive testing, memory assessment, decision-making capacity, the works. When I'm done, you'll have documentation that would stand up in any court in the country. Next, I called Margaret Chen, my financial advisor. Margaret, I need you to prepare a comprehensive report on my investment history, my decision-making process, and the performance of my portfolio over the past decade. Of course. May I ask why? I explained Jessica's latest maneuver, and Margaret's response was immediate and angry. This is unconscionable, Carmen. Your investment decisions have been consistently intelligent and profitable. Your risk tolerance is appropriate for your age and financial situation. Any financial professional would be impressed by your portfolio management. Will you testify to that if necessary? Absolutely. And Carmen, I'm going to reach out to some colleagues in the industry. What Jessica and Marcus are attempting is elder financial abuse, and there are organizations that track this kind of behavior. If they've done this before or try to do it again, there will be a paper trail. By the time I went to bed that night, I had assembled a team of professionals who were not only prepared to defend my competency, but were actively building a case that Jessica and Marcus were the ones behaving inappropriately. As I lay in my king-sized bed, looking out at the city lights through my bedroom window, I thought about the scared young mother I'd been 40 years ago when Jessica's father abandoned us. That woman had vowed never to be vulnerable again, never to be at the mercy of people who might betray her trust. That woman had built a fortune through careful planning and disciplined investing. She'd raised a daughter single-handedly, put her through college, and paid for her wedding. She'd created a life of security and independence that should have been the foundation for a comfortable retirement surrounded by family who loved and respected her. Instead, that woman's success had made her a target for the very people she'd sacrificed to protect. But Carmen Aniston wasn't that scared young mother anymore. She was a wealthy, powerful woman with resources and allies and absolutely no patience for people who mistook her kindness for weakness. Jessica and Marcus wanted a war? They were about to get one. And they were about to discover that in a battle between greed and intelligence, intelligence wins every time. The photographs were devastating. I sat in Dr. Patricia Williams' office, looking at brain scans that revealed what I'd always known but could now prove scientifically. My mind was as sharp as it had ever been. The comprehensive neuropsychological evaluation had taken 6 hours over 2 days, testing everything from basic cognitive function to complex problem-solving abilities. Carmen, your results are remarkable, Dr. Williams said, pointing to various sections of the detailed report. Your memory function scores in the 95th percentile for your age group. Your executive functioning, decision-making, planning, abstract reasoning is superior. And your processing speed, while naturally slower than it would have been at 25, is still well within normal ranges for someone decades younger. And this would hold up in court? Absolutely. I'd stake my professional reputation on it. You are not only mentally competent, you're functioning at a level that would be impressive for someone of any age. I nodded, feeling a grim satisfaction. Jessica and Marcus thought they could paint me as a confused old woman whose recent decisions proved diminished capacity. Instead, they were about to face scientific evidence that I was sharper than most people half my age. There's something else, Dr. Williams continued, her expression growing serious. The behavior you've described from your daughter and son-in-law follows a very specific pattern that we see in elder abuse cases. The isolation, the gaslighting, the attempts to convince you that you're not capable of managing your own affairs. These are classic manipulation tactics used by family members who want to gain control of an elderly relative's assets. Can you document that as well? I already have. It's all in my report, along with my professional opinion that you are the victim of attempted financial elder abuse.
Perfect.
Jessica and Marcus thought they were playing chess, but they'd brought checkers to a master's game. My next stop was the law offices of Birmingham's most prestigious firm, not Harold's comfortable practice, but the kind of white-shoe establishment that corporations hired when they needed to destroy their opponents utterly. I'd made an appointment with Sandra Mitchell, the city's most feared litigation attorney. Mrs. Aniston. Sandra rose from behind her massive mahogany desk, extending a hand. I understand you need someone who specializes in high-stakes family litigation. I need someone who can end a war before it starts, I replied. Sandra smiled, and there was something predatory in the expression. Tell me everything. I laid out the entire situation, Jessica and Marcus's manipulation attempts, their plans to put me in a nursing home, their threat to have me declared incompetent, and all the evidence I'd gathered along the way. Sandra listened without interruption, taking notes on a legal pad. This is actually more straightforward than most elder abuse cases, she said when I finished. Usually, we're dealing with situations where the abuse has already succeeded, where assets have been transferred or decisions have been made under duress. But you caught this early and documented everything. What are my options? Several. We can file for a restraining order to prevent them from harassing you or your professional advisors. We can file a civil suit for attempted elder abuse and fraud. We can report them to Adult Protective Services.
Or...
She paused, studying me carefully. We can do all of those things and more. More. Your daughter and son-in-law made a critical error. They hired an attorney and made formal threats. That creates a paper trail of their intent to defraud you. It also gives us grounds to investigate their own financial situation. I leaned forward, intrigued. What kind of investigation? Well, if they're claiming they were acting in your best interests, it would be relevant to know whether they have their own financial motivations. Debts, bankruptcies, liens, judgments, anything that might explain why they suddenly became so interested in your money. And you can find out about that? Sandra's smile turned shark-like. Mrs. Aniston, by the time I'm done, I'll know everything about Jessica and Marcus's financial situation, employment history, credit reports, and legal troubles. If they have any skeletons in their closets, we'll find them. Do it. I should warn you, this approach is comprehensive. Once we start down this path, there's no going back. Your relationship with your daughter will be permanently destroyed. I thought about the little girl who used to help me tend my orchids, who'd once told me I was the strongest woman in the world. Then I thought about the woman who'd been willing to have me declared incompetent so she could steal everything I'd worked for. She destroyed that relationship herself, I said quietly. I'm just making sure she can't destroy me too. Sandra nodded and made another note. In that case, let me explain what we're going to do. The plan was elegant in its thoroughness. First, We would file for a comprehensive restraining order that would prevent Jessica and Marcus from contacting me, my advisors, or anyone else involved in my financial affairs. Second, we would submit preemptive documentation of my mental competency to the court, making any future competency challenge virtually impossible to sustain. Third, we would launch our own investigation into their finances and motivations, building a case for attempted elder abuse that would make them the defendants rather than the plaintiffs. How long will this take?
I asked.
The restraining order can be filed this week. The investigation will take about a month. After that, we'll have enough ammunition to end this permanently. And the cost. Sandra named a figure that would have shocked most people. For me, it was less than I'd made in dividends the previous quarter. When do we start? We already have. I left Sandra's office feeling lighter than I had in months. For the first time since this nightmare began, I wasn't just reacting to Jessica and Marcus's moves. I was making moves of my own. My phone rang as I was walking to my Tesla. It was Margaret Chen, and she sounded excited. Carmen, you're not going to believe what I found.
What?
I did some research into Marcus's employment history, just out of curiosity. He's been fired twice in the past 5 years for irregularities in client accounts. I stopped walking. What kind of irregularities? The details are confidential, but both companies filed reports with the State Insurance Commission. He's been investigated for potential fraud twice, though no charges were filed. Can you get more details? I'm working on it. But Carmen, there's more. I ran a credit check. Completely legal since they've made financial claims about you that could affect your accounts. They're in serious debt. Credit cards maxed out, behind on their mortgage, car payments past due. They're facing financial ruin. Suddenly, their desperation made perfect sense. This wasn't just greed, it was panic. They were drowning financially and saw me as their life preserver. Margaret, can you document all of this? Already done. I'm sending everything to your attorney this afternoon. That evening, I sat in my living room with a glass of wine, reviewing the evidence that was accumulating against Jessica and Marcus. Financial desperation, employment problems, a pattern of attempting to manipulate elderly relatives. The picture that emerged was damning. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Carmen, this is Marcus.
Please call me.
We need to talk before this gets out of hand. I screenshot the message and forwarded it to Sandra Mitchell. Even their attempts to contact me were now evidence of harassment. Another text came through. I know you're getting bad advice from people who want to keep us apart, but I'm still your son-in-law. I still care about you. I laughed out loud at the audacity of it. Marcus, who'd been planning to put me in a nursing home so he could move into my house, was now claiming to care about me. I typed back a single response. All further communication should go through my attorney, Sandra Mitchell at Mitchell & Associates.
My phone was silent after that.
The next morning, I drove my Tesla to River Towers to check on the progress of my penthouse renovation. The apartment was stunning. Floor-to-ceiling windows with panoramic views of the city, modern fixtures, a gourmet kitchen that would make a professional chef weep with envy. Most importantly, it was mine, purchased with my money, designed to my specifications, with no input from people who saw me as an obstacle to their inheritance. Mrs. Aniston, the contractor called out as I entered. Perfect timing. We just finished installing the smart home system. Would you like to see how it works? For the next hour, I learned how to control everything in my new home with voice commands or my smartphone. Lights, temperature, security, music, even the window blinds. All of it integrated into a system that would make my life easier and more comfortable. This is incredible, I said, adjusting the lighting with a simple voice command. Wait until you see the master bathroom, the contractor grinned. The heated floors and the rainfall shower are going to spoil you rotten. As I toured my new home, I felt a profound sense of satisfaction. This was what 75 years of careful planning and disciplined investing could buy. Not just luxury, but independence. The freedom to live exactly as I chose, without compromise or apology. My phone rang as I was admiring the view from my new balcony. Sandra Mitchell. Good news, she said without preamble. The restraining order has been approved. Jessica and Marcus are prohibited from contacting you or anyone in your professional network. Violation carries potential jail time. How did they react? They don't know yet. They'll be served this afternoon. But Carmen, there's something else. My investigator turned up some very interesting information about Marcus's previous employer. What kind of information? The kind that suggests your instincts about him were exactly right. Can you meet me at my office tomorrow morning? I think you're going to want to see this in person. As I hung up the phone, I realized I was smiling. For months, I'd felt like prey, constantly looking over my shoulder, waiting for the next manipulation or betrayal. Now, for the first time, I felt like the hunter. Jessica and Marcus had made the mistake of underestimating me. They'd seen a quiet, modest old woman and assumed she was weak. They were about to learn the difference between quiet and weak. And by the time I was done with them, they'd understand that some lessons come with a price they can't afford to pay. The manila folder Sandra Mitchell placed on her conference table was thick with documents, photographs, and what appeared to be official reports. I sat across from her, my hands folded calmly in my lap, but my heart was racing with anticipation. Carmen, what I'm about to show you is going to be disturbing, Sandra began. Are you prepared for that? I've been prepared since the day I overheard them planning to warehouse me in a nursing home. Sandra opened the folder and pulled out the first document. Let's start with Marcus. His employment history is even worse than we initially thought. She spread out a series of papers, employment records, insurance commission reports, court documents. He's been fired from 4 jobs in the past 7 years, not 2. Each time, it was for financial irregularities involving elderly clients. My blood ran cold. What kind of irregularities? Unauthorized changes to beneficiaries on life insurance policies, convincing elderly clients to cash out retirement accounts and purchase high-commission products they didn't need. In one case, he actually convinced an 80-year-old woman to mortgage her paid-off home to buy whole life insurance policies that primarily benefited him through commissions. My God, was he prosecuted? No, and that's the pattern. Each time, the companies settled quietly to avoid publicity. The clients were either too embarrassed to pursue criminal charges or— Sandra paused delicately. Or they died before they could follow through.
Exactly.
Marcus specializes in targeting elderly clients who don't have strong family support systems or who have family members willing to go along with his schemes. I thought about how carefully Marcus had ingratiated himself with me, how he'd positioned himself as the concerned son-in-law worried about my welfare. How many other elderly people had he manipulated? How many families had he destroyed? There's more, Sandra continued. His current employer doesn't know about his history because he's been using Jessica's maiden name on job applications and background checks. He's been working under false pretenses for 2 years. Can we report this? We already have. The State Insurance Commission is opening an investigation. Sandra pulled out another set of documents. But Carmen, Marcus isn't the only problem. Jessica's employment record has some interesting gaps as well. She showed me hotel industry reports and employment records. Jessica was terminated from her last 2 positions for inappropriate relationships with vendors and misuse of company resources. The details are confidential, but the pattern suggests she was taking kickbacks from suppliers and possibly embezzling from petty cash accounts. I stared at the documents, trying to reconcile this information with the daughter I thought I knew. She told me she left those jobs for better opportunities. She was fired both times. And Carmen, there's something else. Something that's going to be very difficult to hear. Sandra pulled out a different folder, this one marked with legal seals and official stamps. 6 months ago, Jessica and Marcus filed a petition to have an elderly aunt of Marcus's declared incompetent. What? The aunt had been giving them money, small amounts at first, then larger sums. When she started asking questions about how the money was being used, they tried to have her declared incompetent so they could access her entire estate. My hands began to shake. Did they succeed?
No.
The aunt had good legal representation, and the case was dismissed. But Carmen, do you see the pattern? This is their playbook. They identify vulnerable elderly relatives, establish themselves as concerned caregivers, then systematically work to gain control of assets. I felt sick. So, everything they did to me, they've done before. And they would have done it again, to someone else, if we don't stop them now. Sandra pulled out photographs, surveillance images of Jessica and Marcus meeting with people I didn't recognize, entering buildings, examining documents. We've been watching them since the restraining order was served. They're not taking this lying down. What do you mean? They've hired their own private investigator. They're trying to build a case that you're being manipulated by your financial advisors, that we're all conspiring to isolate you from your loving family. I almost laughed at the audacity of it. They're claiming I'm being manipulated while they were literally planning to put me in a nursing home?
Exactly.
But Carmen, there's something else you need to know. They've been contacting other family members. My blood froze. I had very little extended family, a few distant cousins, some of my late husband's relatives I hadn't spoken to in years.
Who?
Your second cousin Robert in Atlanta. Your ex-husband's sister Margaret in Florida. They're telling these people that you've fallen under the influence of unscrupulous financial advisors who are isolating you from your family and stealing your money. But I haven't spoken to those people in decades. That's exactly what makes their story believable. They're saying you've become paranoid and reclusive, that you've cut off contact with family members because your advisors have convinced you that everyone is after your money. The sophistication of their strategy was breathtaking. They were trying to create a narrative where their attempted theft became my advisor's manipulation, where their greed became their loving concern. Sandra, what can we do? We're going to destroy their credibility before they can damage yours. She pulled out another folder. I've prepared a comprehensive dossier on both of them, employment history, financial troubles, the failed competency petition against Marcus's aunt, everything. We're going to send this information to every family member they've contacted, along with sworn statements from your doctors and financial advisors attesting to your competency. Will that be enough? More than enough. But Carmen, I want to prepare you for what's coming next. They're desperate now. Desperate people do desperate things. As if on cue, my phone rang. Unknown number, but I recognized the area code. It was local. Don't answer it, Sandra advised. Let it go to voicemail. The phone stopped ringing, then immediately started again. Same number. It's them, isn't it? I asked. Probably. They're testing the restraining order, seeing if you'll respond. The phone rang a third time. This time, I looked at Sandra and answered. Hello. Mom. Thank God. It was Jessica, and she sounded frantic. I've been trying to reach you for days. Please, we need to talk. Jessica, you're violating a court order by calling me. I don't care about court orders. You're my mother. These people have poisoned your mind against your own family. I looked at Sandra, who was already making notes and gesturing for me to keep Jessica talking. What people, Jessica? Your lawyers, your financial advisors, they're stealing from you, Mom. Can't you see that? They've convinced you that Marcus and I are the bad guys, so you won't notice that they're the ones taking your money. The only people who have tried to take my money are you and Marcus. That's not true. We were trying to protect you. And now these vultures are circling, and you can't see it because they've manipulated you. The projection was stunning. Jessica was describing exactly what she and Marcus had tried to do, but attributing it to the people who were actually protecting me. Jessica, I'm going to hang up now. Any further contact needs to go through my attorney. Mom, wait. Please, just listen to me for 1 minute. I love you. I've always loved you. Everything we did because we were worried about you. You researched nursing homes without telling me. You prepared legal documents to take control of my finances. You tried to convince my advisors that I was mentally incompetent. That's not love, Jessica. That's theft. But we never took anything. We never hurt you. You tried to take my life away from me while I was still living it. You tried to convince the world that I was crazy so you could steal everything I've worked for. The only reason you didn't succeed is because I was smart enough to see what you were doing. Silence on the other end of the line. Then, in a voice I barely recognized, "You're going to regret this, Mother. When those vultures have taken everything and left you with nothing, don't come crying to me." The line went dead. Sandra was grinning. Perfect. She just violated the restraining order and made threats, all on a recorded line. Recorded? Everything that comes through my office phone system is automatically recorded and archived. Jessica just handed us even more evidence. I sank back in my chair, emotionally exhausted. How did I raise someone capable of this? Carmen, this isn't your fault. Sociopaths are made, not born, and they're often very good at hiding their true nature from the people closest to them. Sociopaths. Sandra's expression was grim. The pattern of behavior, the ability to manipulate multiple victims, the complete lack of empathy for their targets. Marcus definitely fits the profile. And Jessica. Jessica may have been his victim before she became his accomplice. What do you mean? It's possible that Marcus targeted Jessica specifically because of her relationship to you. Sociopaths often cultivate relationships with people who have access to what they want. Over time, they can convince their partners to participate in schemes that the partner would never have considered on their own. I thought about the Jessica I'd raised, not perfect, but not evil either. Was it possible that Marcus had corrupted her, turned her against me for his own purposes? Does it matter? I asked finally, whether she's a victim or a willing participant. For legal purposes, no. She made the choice to participate in the attempted fraud. But for your peace of mind, that's something only you can decide. As I drove home that afternoon, I thought about Sandra's words. Was Jessica a victim of Marcus's manipulation, or was she a willing participant in a scheme to steal my life savings? Did it matter which was true if the end result was the same? My phone buzzed with a text message. This time it was from Marcus. Carmen, Jessica is devastated. She loves you more than anything. Please don't let lawyers destroy our family. I forwarded the message to Sandra without responding. Another violation of the restraining order. More evidence for our case. But as I pulled into my driveway and saw my beautiful house, the house I was about to sell, the home where I'd raised Jessica, where we'd been happy once, I felt a profound sadness. This wasn't how I'd imagined my golden years. I'd pictured family dinners and grandchildren, vacations together and quiet evenings sharing stories. I'd never imagined that the child I'd sacrificed everything for would try to steal everything from me. But sadness wouldn't protect me from people who saw me as nothing more than a bank account with a pulse. And regret wouldn't restore my trust in people who'd proven they were willing to betray it. Tomorrow, I would move into my new penthouse. I would start the life I'd earned, surrounded by people who respected me rather than people who wanted to use me. And Jessica and Marcus would learn that some games have consequences they never saw coming. After all, I hadn't spent 40 years building a fortune just to watch it be stolen by people who mistook my love for weakness. The real Carmen Aniston was just getting started. Moving day arrived like a revelation. As professional movers carefully loaded my Tesla with the last of my personal belongings, the items too precious to trust to anyone else. I stood in the empty shell of what had been my home for 42 years and felt nothing but relief. The house had sold in 6 days for $2.9 million, $100,000 over asking price. 3 couples had gotten into a bidding war, driving the price even higher than Patricia Pemberton had predicted. The closing had been yesterday, and this morning I'd watched the new owners, a young family with twin toddlers, explore their new home with the same excitement I'd felt decades ago. "Mrs. Aniston?" The moving foreman approached with his clipboard. "That's the last of it. Your new place is going to be something special."
Thank you, Miguel.
"You and your team have been wonderful." I handed him an envelope containing tips for the entire crew, generous tips that reflected my new philosophy of living openly rather than secretly. Money was meant to be used, meant to make life better for myself and the people who helped me along the way. As I drove my Tesla through Birmingham's downtown district toward River Towers, I felt like I was driving toward a completely new life. Behind me was the woman who'd hidden her success, who'd diminished herself to make others comfortable, who'd prioritized other people's feelings over her own well-being. Ahead of me was Carmen Aniston, multimillionaire, ready to live the life she'd earned. River Towers was a gleaming 40-story tower of glass and steel, the kind of building that redefined a city's skyline. The penthouse occupied the entire 40th floor, with 360-degree views of Birmingham and beyond. As the private elevator opened directly into my new foyer, I stepped into what could only be described as a masterpiece. The renovation had been completed during the sale of my house, and the result exceeded even my ambitious expectations. Floor-to-ceiling windows filled the space with natural light, while motorized blinds could provide privacy at the touch of a button. The open-concept living area flowed seamlessly from a gourmet kitchen with restaurant-grade appliances to a dining area that could seat 12, to a living room with custom furniture arranged to take advantage of the stunning views. But it was the master suite that truly took my breath away. The bedroom was larger than the entire first floor of many homes, with a sitting area, a private balcony, and a walk-in closet that rivaled luxury boutiques. The bathroom was pure decadence. Heated marble floors, a soaking tub positioned to overlook the city, and a shower system that could simulate everything from a gentle rain to a tropical downpour. "Welcome home, Mrs. Aniston." I turned to find James, the building's concierge manager, standing in my foyer with a welcoming smile and a bottle of champagne. "James, this is incredible. We're honored to have you as a resident. Is there anything you need to make your transition smoother?" "Actually, yes. I'd like to host a small gathering next week, maybe 20 people. Nothing too elaborate, just a housewarming party." "Of course. We can arrange catering, flowers, music, whatever you need. Just let me know your preferences." As James left, I walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows that faced west, toward the setting sun. Somewhere out there, in a modest apartment they could barely afford, Jessica and Marcus were probably planning their next move. But for the first time in months, their schemes felt distant and irrelevant. This was my kingdom now, built with my money, designed to my specifications, occupied only by invitation. No one could manipulate me here, lie to me here, or make me feel like a burden in my own home. My phone rang. Margaret Chen, my financial advisor. "Carmen, how's the new place?" "Magnificent. Absolutely magnificent." "I'm so glad. Listen, I have some updates on your portfolio. With the proceeds from the house sale, we're looking at some interesting investment opportunities."
I'm listening.
There's a tech startup developing assisted living technologies, smart home systems designed specifically for aging in place. They're looking for angel investors, and given your recent experiences, I thought it might appeal to you. Assisted living technologies? Think about it. Systems that can monitor health, detect falls, manage medications, all while allowing people to stay in their own homes instead of being warehoused in facilities. It's exactly the kind of innovation that could help other people avoid what Jessica and Marcus tried to do to you. I smiled, understanding immediately why Margaret had brought this to my attention. How much are they looking for? Initial investment rounds start at $500,000. Set up a meeting. I'm interested. After hanging up with Margaret, I poured myself a glass of wine and stood on my private balcony, looking out over the city I'd called home my entire life. For the first time, I felt like I truly belonged here, not as someone hiding in the shadows, but as someone who'd earned her place in the light. My phone buzzed with a text from Sandra Mitchell. Judge approved contempt charges against J&M for violating restraining order. Court date set for next week. They're in serious trouble. I smiled and raised my wine glass in a silent toast to the city below. Jessica and Marcus had wanted to control my life, my money, my future. Instead, they'd given me the motivation to finally step into the life I deserved. The next morning, I woke up in my new bedroom as sunlight streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, and for the first time in months, I felt genuinely excited about the day ahead. I had an appointment with Dr. Williams for follow-up evaluation, lunch with Margaret to discuss investment opportunities, and a meeting with a travel agent about the European vacation I'd been postponing for decades. But first, I had a phone call to make. I dialed the number for Sunny Acres Assisted Living, the facility Jessica had researched as my potential new home. When the director came on the line, I introduced myself not as a potential resident, but as a potential donor. Mrs. Aniston, what a pleasant surprise. How can I help you? I understand you provide services for elderly people who need care, but may not have family support. Yes, we have several programs for seniors who are isolated or vulnerable to exploitation. I'd like to make a donation to those programs. A substantial donation. That's wonderfully generous. May I ask what inspired your interest in our work? I looked out at my panoramic view of the city, thinking about Jessica's careful research into facilities where she could warehouse me. Let's just say I have a personal understanding of how vulnerable elderly people can be, even to their own families. How substantial a donation are we discussing? $1 million to start. The silence on the other end of the line was profound. When the director found her voice again, it was filled with emotion. Mrs. Aniston, a donation of that magnitude would transform our programs. We could help hundreds of seniors maintain their independence and protect them from financial abuse. That's exactly what I'm hoping for. As I hung up the phone, I felt a deep satisfaction. Jessica had researched Sunny Acres as a place to imprison me. Instead, my money would help protect other elderly people from the kind of abuse she and Marcus had attempted. The irony was perfect. My phone rang almost immediately. Harold Fitzpatrick, my attorney. Carmen, I just got off the phone with Jessica's lawyer. They want to negotiate. Negotiate what? They're offering to drop any claims against your competency in exchange for you dropping the elder abuse charges and giving them what they call a reasonable inheritance advance. I laughed out loud. They want me to pay them to stop trying to steal from me? Essentially, yes. They're claiming this has all been a misunderstanding, that they were genuinely concerned about your welfare, and that a financial settlement would allow everyone to move forward as a family. What did you tell them? I told them I'd discuss it with you, but Harold, I have to ask, is there any part of you that wants to reconcile with Jessica? I thought about the question seriously. Was there a part of me that missed my daughter, that wished things could go back to the way they were before I discovered her true nature? Harold, let me ask you something. If someone tried to rob your house, and when they got caught they claimed they were just checking to make sure your security system worked, would you invite them over for dinner? Point taken. Jessica and Marcus didn't make a mistake or have a misunderstanding. They made a calculated decision to steal my life from me. The only thing they regret is getting caught. So no negotiation? No negotiation. Let them face the consequences of their choices. That afternoon, I met with the travel agent, a sophisticated woman named Claire who specialized in luxury travel for mature clients. Mrs. Aniston, with your budget and time frame, we can create an absolutely extraordinary experience. Are you interested in cruises, land tours, or perhaps a combination? I want to see everything I've missed while I was being careful and modest. I want to stay in the best hotels, eat at the finest restaurants, and experience things I've only read about in books. Claire's eyes lit up. I have just the thing. A 3-month European tour. London, Paris, Rome, Barcelona, Vienna, Prague. Luxury accommodations, private guides, first-class travel throughout. How much? She quoted a price that would have horrified the old Carmen. The new Carmen just nodded. Book it. As I walked back to River Towers that evening, I passed a newsstand and caught sight of the local business journal's headline. Local woman's $3 million real estate sale signals downtown luxury market boom. The article was about my house sale and its impact on Birmingham's high-end real estate market. There was even a small photo of me emerging from my Tesla at River Towers, looking confident and elegant in one of my new outfits. I bought a copy and read the article as I rode the elevator to my penthouse. For the first time in my life, I was publicly visible as a person of wealth and substance. No more hiding, no more minimizing my success to make others comfortable. That evening, as I sat in my beautiful living room with a glass of wine and a view that stretched to the horizon, I called Dr. Patricia Williams. Patricia, it's Carmen Aniston. I wanted to thank you for everything you've done. How are you settling into your new life? Beautifully. But I was calling because I want to do something with my experience. I want to help other elderly people who might be facing what I faced. What did you have in mind? I want to fund a program, legal aid, psychological support, financial advice, for elderly people dealing with family members who are trying to exploit them. Carmen, that's a wonderful idea. Elder abuse is so underreported because victims are often embarrassed or afraid to seek help.
Exactly.
And I want to call it the Independence Foundation. Perfect. How can I help? I want you to run it. The silence stretched for a moment then. Carmen, I'm honored. But are you sure? I've never been more sure of anything. You helped me reclaim my life. Now I want to help you give that same gift to other people. As I hung up the phone, I felt a profound sense of purpose. Jessica and Marcus had tried to steal my independence, my dignity, and my future. Instead, they'd inspired me to use my resources to protect others from the same fate. My phone buzzed with one final message of the day from Sandra Mitchell. Court hearing moved up to tomorrow. J&M's lawyer wants to plea bargain. They know they're in trouble. I smiled and set the phone aside. Tomorrow, Jessica and Marcus would face a judge and learn that actions have consequences. They'd discover that the confused old woman they thought they were manipulating was actually a force they never saw coming. But tonight I was going to enjoy my wine, my view, and my freedom. After all, I had a lot of living to catch up on. The courtroom was smaller than I'd expected, but the weight of what was happening filled every corner. I sat in the front row behind Sandra Mitchell, wearing a tailored navy suit that cost more than Jessica used to make in a month. My silver hair was perfectly styled, my jewelry understated but expensive, and for the first time in years, I looked exactly like what I was, a wealthy, powerful woman who would not be intimidated. Jessica and Marcus sat at the defendant's table with their attorney, a nervous-looking young man who kept shuffling papers and whispering urgently to his clients. Jessica looked terrible, hollow-eyed and pale, wearing a cheap suit that hung badly on her thin frame. Marcus was fidgeting constantly, his face flushed with the kind of desperation that comes from watching your world collapse around you. All rise for the Honorable Judge Patricia Hawthorne. Judge Hawthorne was a woman in her 60s with steel-gray hair and the kind of presence that commanded instant respect. She'd built her reputation handling complex family law cases, and Sandra had told me she had zero tolerance for elder abuse. Be seated. We're here today for the matter of Aniston versus Trent and Trent regarding violations of a protective order and charges of attempted elder abuse. Judge Hawthorne's voice carried clearly through the small courtroom. Counselor Mitchell, please proceed. Sandra stood, and I felt a surge of pride watching her command the room. She was magnificent, confident, prepared, and absolutely devastating in her presentation of the facts. Your Honor, this case represents a clear-cut example of attempted financial elder abuse by family members who saw the victim not as a beloved mother and mother-in-law, but as an obstacle to what they considered their rightful inheritance. She methodically laid out the evidence. The recordings of Jessica and Marcus planning to put me in a nursing home, their attempts to access my financial information, their efforts to have me declared incompetent, and their violations of the protective order. The defendants systematically attempted to manipulate Mrs. Carmen Aniston, a 75-year-old woman, by convincing her she was suffering from mental decline. They researched assisted living facilities without her knowledge, prepared legal documents to gain control of her assets, and when she refused to cooperate with their scheme, they threatened to have her declared legally incompetent. Judge Hawthorne interrupted. And Mrs. Aniston's actual mental state? Your Honor, I present evidence from Dr. Patricia Williams, a board-certified geriatric psychiatrist. Sandra handed a thick folder to the bailiff. Dr. Williams conducted comprehensive neuropsychological testing on Mrs. Aniston. Her cognitive function scores in the 95th percentile for her age group. She is not only mentally competent, she is functioning at a level that would be impressive for someone decades younger. The judge reviewed the psychological evaluation, her expression growing darker as she read. This is quite comprehensive. Dr. Williams concludes that Mrs. Aniston is fully competent and shows no signs of diminished capacity. Correct, Your Honor. Furthermore, Dr. Williams identified the defendant's behavior as following classic patterns of elder abuse manipulation, gaslighting, isolation attempts, and systematic undermining of the victim's confidence in her own judgment. Jessica's attorney stood up nervously. Your Honor, if I may. You may not. Judge Hawthorne cut him off. I'm not finished reviewing this evidence. Please continue. Counselor Mitchell. Sandra presented the financial evidence next. Marcus's history of exploiting elderly clients, their desperate financial situation, and the attempted competency petition against Marcus's aunt. This was not a one-time lapse in judgment, Your Honor. This was a pattern of behavior. The defendants specifically target elderly relatives with assets, establish themselves as concerned caregivers, then systematically work to gain control of those assets. And the protective order violations? Multiple documented violations, Your Honor. Phone calls, text messages, attempts to contact Mrs. Aniston through third parties, all recorded and documented. Judge Hawthorne set down the papers and looked directly at Jessica and Marcus. Mr. Trent, Miss Trent, please stand. They rose shakily, Jessica clutching Marcus's arm for support. In 40 years on the bench, I have seen many cases of family members taking advantage of elderly relatives. But rarely have I seen such a systematic, calculated attempt to destroy someone's independence and dignity. The judge's voice was ice-cold. You attempted to convince a competent, intelligent woman that she was mentally incapacitated so you could steal her life savings. When that failed, you tried to have her legally declared incompetent. When that failed, you violated a court order designed to protect her from your harassment. Jessica started to cry, but Judge Hawthorne was unmoved. Your Honor, Jessica's attorney tried again. My clients were genuinely concerned about Mrs. Aniston's welfare. Counselor, your clients researched nursing homes, prepared guardianship documents, and attempted to gain access to financial accounts belonging to a woman they now claim to love and respect. Their actions speak louder than your words. The judge turned her attention back to Jessica and Marcus. You targeted Mrs. Aniston because you believed she was vulnerable. You discovered instead that she is formidable. You attempted to steal from someone you assumed was weak and found instead that she is strong enough to fight back and win. Judge Hawthorne consulted her notes before continuing. Mr. Trent, I'm ordering you to pay $50,000 in fines and perform 500 hours of community service, working with elderly abuse victims. You will also be required to undergo counseling and will be prohibited from working in any capacity involving financial services for elderly clients. Marcus swayed on his feet, and Jessica tightened her grip on his arm. Ms. Trent, you will pay $25,000 in fines and perform 300 hours of community service. You will also be required to undergo counseling. Your Honor, Jessica's voice was barely a whisper. We don't have that kind of money. Then you'll make payment arrangements. And I suggest you find it quickly, because failure to comply with this order will result in jail time. Judge Hawthorne's gaze found me in the gallery. Mrs. Aniston, would you like to make a victim impact statement? I stood slowly, feeling every eye in the courtroom on me. This was my moment. My chance to tell Jessica and Marcus exactly what their betrayal had cost me. Your Honor, I spent 30 years building a fortune through careful investing and disciplined saving. I did this not for myself, but to ensure that my family would be secure, that my daughter would never face the financial struggles I faced as a young single mother. My voice was steady, clear, carrying easily through the silent courtroom. I hid my success because I wanted to be loved for who I was, not what I could provide. I lived modestly because I wanted my relationships to be based on genuine affection, not financial calculation. I looked directly at Jessica, who was crying harder now. But my daughter and her husband saw my love as weakness and my trust as opportunity. They were willing to destroy my independence, my dignity, and my autonomy for money. They were prepared to warehouse me in a facility while they enjoyed the fruits of my 40 years of labor. Jessica opened her mouth as if to speak, but I held up a hand. I am not finished. The courtroom was completely silent except for the sound of Jessica's muffled sobs. The saddest part of this entire ordeal is not that they tried to steal my money. Money can be protected. Assets can be secured. The saddest part is that they stole something far more valuable. They stole my ability to trust the people I love most. I paused, letting the weight of those words settle. Your Honor, I don't want revenge. I want justice. I want them to understand that elder abuse has consequences, that vulnerable people deserve protection, and that families are supposed to be sanctuaries, not hunting grounds. I sat down to complete silence. Judge Hawthorne nodded slowly. Mrs. Aniston, thank you for that statement. Your dignity in the face of this betrayal is remarkable. She turned back to Jessica and Marcus. The protective order will remain in place indefinitely. You are prohibited from contacting Mrs. Aniston directly or indirectly. You are prohibited from discussing her financial affairs with anyone. Any violation will result in immediate incarceration. She banged her gavel. Court is adjourned. As people began filing out of the courtroom, I sat for a moment, feeling a profound sense of closure. Jessica and Marcus had faced justice. They would pay for what they'd tried to do, both financially and in terms of their freedom and reputation. Sandra turned to me with a triumphant smile. How do you feel? Free, I said simply. For the first time in months, I feel completely free. As I walked toward the exit, I heard Jessica call out behind me. Mom, please. We can still fix this. We can still be a family. I didn't turn around. There was nothing left to say to people who'd been willing to sacrifice my freedom for their greed. Outside the courthouse, reporters were waiting. Word had spread about the case. Wealthy widow fights back against family members trying to exploit her, and the local media was interested in the story. Mrs. Aniston, how do you feel about the judge's decision? I looked directly into the camera, thinking about other elderly people who might be facing what I'd faced, who might be watching this news report while their own families plotted against them. I feel vindicated. But more importantly, I hope this case sends a message that elderly people are not easy targets. We have resources, we have rights, and we will fight back when those rights are violated. What's next for you? I smiled, thinking about my new penthouse, my upcoming European vacation, and the Independence Foundation I was planning to launch. I'm going to live the life I've earned, fully, freely, and on my own terms. As I drove my Tesla away from the courthouse, I felt lighter than I had in years. The woman who'd been afraid to show her success, who'd hidden her accomplishments to avoid making others uncomfortable, was gone forever. In her place was Carmen Aniston, wealthy, powerful, and absolutely determined to enjoy every moment of the freedom she'd fought so hard to protect. Behind me, Jessica and Marcus were facing the consequences of their choices. Ahead of me was a future limited only by my imagination and my bank account, and both of those were considerable. 6 months after the court hearing, my life had transformed beyond recognition. I stood in the conference room of the Independence Foundation's new offices, a beautiful space on the 20th floor of downtown Birmingham's newest building, watching Dr. Patricia Williams present our first quarterly report to the board of directors. In just 6 months, we've handled 127 cases of suspected elder abuse, Patricia was saying, her voice filled with pride and determination. We've recovered over $3.2 million in stolen assets, prevented 47 forced institutionalizations, and provided legal representation to elderly victims who never could have afforded it otherwise. The board members, a carefully selected group of attorneys, social workers, physicians, and financial experts, nodded approvingly. I'd funded the foundation with an initial $5 million donation, but we were already receiving grants and donations from other sources. The work we were doing was needed and people were taking notice. Mrs. Aniston called out board member David Chen, Margaret's husband and a retired federal prosecutor. What inspired you to create such a comprehensive approach? I stood, looking out the floor-to-ceiling windows at the city below. Personal experience taught me that elder abuse isn't just financial, it's psychological, legal, and social. Victims need more than just legal representation. They need counseling to recover from the betrayal, financial advice to protect their assets, and social support to rebuild their confidence. And the results speak for themselves, added board member Sarah Martinez, the former director of Alabama's Adult Protective Services. The holistic approach is revolutionary. Other states are already asking about replicating our model. After the meeting, Patricia and I walked to my new favorite restaurant, Elegant Bistro 2 blocks from the foundation offices. Over wine and perfectly prepared salmon, we discussed our next expansion plans. Carmen, I keep thinking about what you said in court, that families should be sanctuaries, not hunting grounds. We're making that a reality for people who thought they had nowhere to turn. It's the most rewarding thing I've ever done, I replied, and I meant it. Building wealth had been satisfying, but using that wealth to protect vulnerable people felt like the culmination of everything I'd learned about life. My phone buzzed with a text from James, my concierge at River Towers. Mrs. A, the Architectural Digest photographer is here for your 3 p.m. appointment. I smiled at Patricia. I have to run. Architectural Digest is doing a feature on the penthouse for their Homes of Accomplished Women issue. How wonderfully appropriate, Patricia grinned. The woman who was almost warehoused in a nursing home is now being featured in the nation's premier design magazine. The irony wasn't lost on me. 6 months ago, Jessica and Marcus had been researching institutional care facilities for me. Today, One of the country's most prestigious publications was celebrating my home as an example of sophisticated living. Back at River Towers, I found the photographer and her team setting up equipment in my living room. The apartment looked stunning. I'd added some beautiful art pieces during my European vacation, including an original Monet I'd purchased at auction in Paris. "Mrs. Aniston, your home is extraordinary," the photographer said. "The combination of modern luxury and classic elegance is exactly what our readers love to see." Thank you. I wanted to create a space that reflected who I really am, not who I thought I should be. As they worked, capturing the perfect light streaming through my windows and reflecting off my carefully chosen furnishings, I thought about the journey that had brought me here. The scared young mother who'd hidden her growing wealth out of fear had been replaced by a confident woman who understood that success was meant to be lived, not hidden. That evening, I was dressing for a gala dinner. The Birmingham Museum of Art was honoring major donors, and my recent $2 million contribution had earned me a seat at the head table. When my phone rang, it was Harold Fitzpatrick, my original attorney. "Carmen, I have news about Jessica and Marcus." "What kind of news?" "They're filing for bankruptcy. Both personal and business bankruptcy. Marcus lost his insurance license, and Jessica was fired from her hotel management position when her background check revealed the court case." I felt no satisfaction in their downfall, only a distant sadness for what might have been if they'd chosen differently. "Are they trying to contact me?"
No.
"In fact, they've both left Birmingham. I heard they moved to Florida, trying to start over somewhere their reputations haven't preceded them." "Good. That's probably best for everyone." After Harold's call, I stood on my balcony looking out over the city lights, thinking about the path that had led me here. Jessica and Marcus had tried to steal my future and ended up destroying their own. They'd seen me as vulnerable prey and discovered instead that I was a formidable opponent who would not be victimized. The gala was spectacular. I sat between the museum director and Birmingham's mayor, discussing my plans to endow a new wing dedicated to contemporary women artists. The conversation flowed easily. I was comfortable now in these circles, confident in my right to be here. "Mrs. Aniston," the mayor said during dessert, "your foundation is getting national attention. I understand the Justice Department is interested in your model for combating elder abuse." "We're in discussions with several federal agencies," I confirmed. "Elder abuse costs the country billions of dollars annually, not to mention the human suffering it causes. If we can develop replicable solutions, we could help protect vulnerable people nationwide." "And I understand you're planning to expand internationally?" I smiled. "I'm funding a research project at Oxford University to study elder abuse patterns in Europe. The problem isn't uniquely American, unfortunately." As the evening wound down, I was approached by a young woman who introduced herself as Rebecca Stone, a reporter for the Wall Street Journal. "Mrs. Aniston, I'm working on a story about women who've built substantial wealth later in life and are using it to create social change. Would you be interested in being interviewed?" "What kind of article?" "It would focus on how women your age are redefining retirement, using their resources and experience to tackle social problems." "You'd be the cover story." A year ago, the idea of being featured on the cover of the Wall Street Journal would have terrified me. Now it felt like a natural next step. I'd be honored. 2 weeks later, I was sitting in my living room across from Rebecca Stone, sharing my story for a national audience. The interview was comprehensive. My early struggles as a single mother, my gradual accumulation of wealth through careful investing, Jessica and Marcus's betrayal, and my decision to use my resources to help other vulnerable elderly people. What would you say to other elderly people who might be facing similar situations with their families?" Rebecca asked. "I'd say that your age doesn't make you weak, and your love for family members doesn't obligate you to be their victim. You have rights, you have resources, and you have the right to protect both. Don't let anyone convince you that being old means being powerless. And what about family members who might be contemplating taking advantage of elderly relatives? I looked directly into the camera the photographer was using to capture our conversation. I'd tell them that elderly people today are smarter, wealthier, and more legally sophisticated than any generation before us. We will fight back, we will win, and the consequences of your actions will follow you for the rest of your life. The article, titled "The Gray Rebellion: When Seniors Fight Back," was published 6 weeks later and became one of the journal's most read pieces of the year. My phone rang constantly with interview requests, speaking invitations, and offers to consult on elder abuse legislation. But the call that meant the most came from Dr. Williams. "Carmen, we just got our biggest case yet. A 90-year-old woman in Atlanta whose son has been systematically draining her accounts. She saw your Wall Street Journal article and called us for help. Can we help her? We already are. I'm flying to Atlanta tomorrow with one of our attorneys. But Carmen, she said something that made me think of you." "What?" "She said reading your story gave her hope that she could fight back and win. She said if Carmen Aniston could reclaim her life at 75, maybe she could reclaim hers at 90. That evening, I poured myself a glass of wine and stood on my balcony, looking out over the city I'd called home my entire life. In the distance, I could see the lights of the foundation offices where tomorrow, Patricia and her team would continue the work of protecting vulnerable people from exploitation. My phone buzzed with a text from my travel agent. "Your African safari is confirmed for next month. First-class flights, luxury accommodations, private guides. You're going to love it." I smiled. At 76, I was living adventures I'd only dreamed about, funding causes I was passionate about, and using my voice to protect people who couldn't protect themselves. Jessica and Marcus had tried to steal my future and instead had given me the motivation to create a future more magnificent than anything I'd previously imagined. My phone rang one final time. Margaret Chen, my financial advisor. "Carmen, I have the final numbers on your portfolio performance this year. How did we do? Your investments have grown by $3.2 million, even after your charitable donations and lifestyle expenses. You're wealthier today than you were a year ago, despite spending more money in the past 12 months than most people see in a lifetime." I laughed. "So, I can afford to keep living like this?" "Carmen, at your current rate of spending and giving, your money will last several lifetimes. You could buy a private jet tomorrow and it wouldn't make a meaningful dent in your wealth." A private jet? The idea was intriguing. That would make it easier to travel for foundation business. "I'll have some options for you to review next week." As I hung up the phone, I realized that the scared, hiding woman who'd once clipped coupons and shopped at discount stores was completely gone. In her place was someone who understood that money was a tool for creating security, enabling experiences, and making positive change in the world. Tomorrow, I would tour a property I was considering purchasing for the Foundation's new residential facility, a place where elderly abuse victims could stay while rebuilding their lives. Next month, I would speak at a congressional hearing about federal elder abuse legislation. And next year, I would open Foundation offices in 5 additional states. At 76, I wasn't winding down. I was just getting started. Jessica and Marcus had seen an old woman they could manipulate and control. Instead, they'd awakened a force they never anticipated, a woman with the resources, intelligence, and determination to not just protect herself, but to protect countless others. The scared victim they'd tried to create had become the powerful advocate they never saw coming. And I was far from finished. 1 year after the Wall Street Journal article was published, I was standing in the Oval Office, shaking hands with the President of the United States. The Independence Foundation had become a national model for combating elder abuse, and Congress had just passed the Elder Protection Act, legislation that incorporated many of our recommendations for strengthening legal protections for vulnerable seniors. "Mrs. Aniston," The president said as photographers captured the moment, "Your work has literally changed the lives of thousands of elderly Americans. This legislation wouldn't exist without your foundation's research and advocacy." Thank you, Mr. President. But the real heroes are the seniors who found the courage to fight back against people who saw them as easy targets. As I left the White House, I reflected on how dramatically my life had changed in just 18 months. The woman who'd once hidden her wealth and minimized her accomplishments was now a nationally recognized advocate whose foundation operated in 12 states and had recovered over $50 million in stolen assets for elderly victims. My phone rang as my driver navigated Washington, D.C. traffic. It was Patricia Williams, calling from our Birmingham headquarters. "Carmen, you're not going to believe this. We just got a call from 60 Minutes. They want to do a feature story on the foundation for their Sunday night broadcast." 60 Minutes? I'd watched that program religiously for decades, never imagining I'd someday be featured on it. "They want to follow several of our cases, interview you about your own experience, and show how the foundation is changing the landscape of elder protection." "When do they want to film?" "Next month." "But Carmen, there's something else. Something wonderful and terrible at the same time." "What do you mean?" "We got a call this morning from a woman in Tampa, Florida. She says her elderly mother is being exploited by the mother's daughter and son-in-law. She wants our help." I felt a chill run down my spine. Tampa? That's where Jessica and Marcus moved. "Carmen, the woman who called, her name is Margaret Hoffman. And she says the people exploiting her mother are named Jessica and Marcus Trent." The silence stretched between us as the implications sank in. Jessica and Marcus, facing bankruptcy and ruin in Birmingham, had moved to Florida and found a new victim to exploit. "Tell me everything," I said quietly. "Mrs. Hoffman is 82 years old, a widow with substantial assets. Her daughter Margaret, the one who called us, lives in Seattle and only visits once or twice a year. Apparently, Jessica got a job as Mrs. Hoffman's companion through a home care agency, and Marcus has been helping her with her finances." Oh my God, they're doing it again. It gets worse. Margaret says Jessica has convinced Mrs. Hoffman that her Seattle daughter is only interested in her money, that she shouldn't trust her, and that Jessica and Marcus are the only people who really care about her. I closed my eyes, feeling sick. How much have they stolen? Margaret isn't sure yet, but she thinks it's substantial. Mrs. Hoffman has been giving them money for emergencies and investments, and Jessica has been pushing her to update her will. Can we help? We can try. But Carmen, this is going to be complicated. Mrs. Hoffman isn't our client. She trusts Jessica and Marcus. Her daughter wants to help, but she has no legal standing to access her mother's accounts or make decisions about her care. What do we need to do? We need to get to Tampa and assess the situation. But Carmen, I have to ask, are you prepared for this? Facing Jessica and Marcus again. I thought about the question. Was I prepared to confront the daughter who'd betrayed me, who'd apparently learned nothing from her court-ordered counseling and had simply moved to a new location to find fresh victims? I'm not just prepared, Patricia. I'm eager. 2 days later, I was on my new private jet, a Gulfstream G650 that made travel infinitely more convenient, flying to Tampa with Patricia, our lead attorney Sandra Mitchell, and a private investigator we'd hired to document Jessica and Marcus's activities. As we descended into Tampa, I looked out the window at the sprawling city below and felt a familiar sense of determination. Jessica and Marcus had made a critical error. They'd assumed their victim was isolated and helpless, with no one to protect her. They hadn't counted on Margaret Hoffman in Seattle, who'd grown suspicious when her mother's regular phone calls became less frequent and her mother's explanations for various expenses became increasingly vague. More importantly, they hadn't counted on the Independence Foundation, the organization their own crimes had inspired me to create. We met Margaret Hoffman at our hotel that evening. She was a woman in her 50s, clearly distraught but determined to protect her mother. I knew something was wrong when Mom stopped talking about her garden, Margaret said over dinner. She'd been passionate about gardening her entire life, but suddenly all she could talk about was Jessica this and Marcus that. How wonderful they were, how they were the only people who really cared about her. That's classic isolation behavior, Patricia explained. Abusers work to cut their victims off from existing support systems and make themselves seem indispensable. How much money do you think they've taken? Sandra asked. I'm not sure. Mom was always private about her finances, but I know she had substantial savings and investments. She owned her house outright, had a good pension, and my father left her well provided for. Has she made any major changes to her estate planning? Margaret nodded miserably. Last month, she told me she was updating her will to be fair to the people who actually take care of her. I tried to ask questions, but she got angry and said I was just like other greedy relatives who only cared about inheritance. Those are Jessica's words, I said quietly. I've heard that exact speech before. Mrs. Aniston, can you really help us? I don't know what else to do. I reached across the table and took her hand. Margaret, your mother is not going to become another victim. I promise you that. The next morning, our private investigator followed Jessica to her job at the home care agency, while Sandra and I met with a local attorney who specialized in elder abuse cases. By noon, we had a clear picture of the situation. Jessica has been Mrs. Hoffman's primary caregiver for 8 months, the investigator reported. She's there 6 days a week, has gradually taken over shopping, bill paying, and social activities. Marcus shows up regularly to help with financial planning. And Mrs. Hoffman's condition? Physically frail but mentally sharp, according to neighbors I spoke with. But she's become increasingly isolated. Stopped attending her book club, quit her volunteer work at the library, rarely sees friends anymore. Classic pattern, Patricia murmured. Systematic isolation while creating emotional dependency. What about financially? Sandra consulted her notes. We found records of large cash withdrawals, unusual investment purchases, and several sizable checks made out to Jessica and Marcus for various emergencies. In 8 months, we estimate they've taken approximately $200,000. I felt a cold rage building in my chest. Jessica had learned nothing from our legal battle, from the court-ordered counseling, from the consequences she'd faced. She'd simply moved to a new location and found a new victim to exploit. What's our next step? We need to document everything thoroughly before we make any moves, Sandra said. If we tip them off too early, they might disappear with whatever money they can grab. How long will that take? A few more days. But, Carmen, there's something else to consider. Do you want to confront Jessica directly? I thought about the question. Part of me wanted to walk into Mrs. Hoffman's house and face my daughter, to let her know that her past had caught up with her. But the strategic part of my mind knew that surprise would be more effective. Not yet. Let's gather all the evidence first. Then we'll decide how to play this. That afternoon, I did something I hadn't done in over a year. I drove past a house where Jessica was living. It was a modest apartment complex, the kind of place people lived when they were starting over or running from something. Seeing Jessica's car in the parking lot gave me a strange sense of completion. The woman who tried to steal my life was now living exactly the kind of reduced circumstances she'd tried to force on me. My phone rang as I sat in my rental car, watching the building. It was Margaret Chen, my financial advisor, calling from Birmingham. Carmen, I have some news that might interest you. Do you remember that tech startup I mentioned, the one developing assisted living technologies? Of course. I invested $500,000 in their angel round. They just went public. Your investment is now worth $12 million. I laughed, shaking my head at the irony. While Jessica and Marcus were scraping by, stealing from elderly victims to pay their bills, my wealth continued to grow exponentially. Every month I delayed their arrest was another month of investment gains that widened the gap between their desperation and my abundance. Margaret, I want you to do something for me. Anything. Set up a $5 million fund specifically for victims of repeat elder abuse offenders. Cases where the perpetrators have targeted multiple victims.
Done.
Any particular name for the fund? I looked at the shabby apartment building where my daughter was plotting to steal from another elderly woman and smiled. Call it the Justice Fund. Because some people need to learn that actions have consequences, even when they think they've escaped them. That evening, at dinner with Patricia and Sandra, I outlined my plan. We're not just going to stop Jessica and Marcus from victimizing Mrs. Hoffman. We're going to make sure they can never do this to anyone else again. What do you have in mind? We're going to make them famous. When 60 Minutes airs our story next month, Jessica and Marcus are going to be featured as prime examples of predators who target vulnerable elderly people. Their faces will be on national television, their methods will be exposed, and every elderly person in America will know to avoid them. Sandra smiled grimly. That's actually brilliant. Public exposure is often more effective than just legal consequences. And, I continued, we're going to make sure that every law enforcement agency in the country knows their names and their methods. They won't be able to move to a new city and start over again. Carmen, Patricia said quietly, are you sure you're ready for the media attention this will bring? Your personal story with Jessica will become public knowledge. I thought about the question. Was I ready for the entire country to know that my own daughter had tried to exploit me, that the people I'd loved most had betrayed my trust for money? Patricia, for over a year, I've been helping other people find the courage to speak out against family members who've abused them. How can I ask them to be brave if I'm not willing to be brave myself? And if Jessica tries to contact you, if she realizes you're behind her exposure, then she'll learn something important, I said, raising my wine glass in a toast. She'll learn that the old woman she tried to victimize has become someone she never anticipated, someone with the resources, the platform, and the determination to make sure she faces consequences for every person she's ever hurt. As we clinked glasses, I felt a profound sense of purpose. Jessica and Marcus had created their own nemesis when they'd underestimated me. Now they were about to discover that their victim had become their judge, jury, and executioner. Tomorrow, we would begin gathering the evidence that would end their careers as predators permanently. After all, I'd learned that justice delayed is not justice denied. Sometimes it's justice perfected. 2 months later, the 60-Minute studio in New York was smaller than I'd expected, but the impact of what was about to happen felt enormous. I sat across from correspondent Leslie Stahl, wearing an emerald green St. John suit that had cost more than Jessica used to make in 2 months. My silver hair was perfectly styled, my jewelry understated but expensive, and for the first time in my 77 years, I was exactly who I was meant to be. Mrs. Aniston, Leslie began, her voice carrying the authority that had made her a legendary journalist. When your own daughter tried to have you declared mentally incompetent so she could control your fortune, what went through your mind? Honestly, Leslie, my first thought was that I'd failed as a mother. How had I raised someone capable of such betrayal? But then I realized that Jessica's actions weren't a reflection of my parenting. They were a reflection of her character. The cameras captured every word as I told my story. The hidden wealth, the careful deception I'd maintained for decades, Jessica and Marcus's systematic attempt to manipulate me, and my decision to fight back. You documented everything they did? Everything. Every phone call, every lie, every manipulation. I knew that if I was going to defend myself, I needed proof. And after the court case, you thought it was over? I smiled grimly. I hoped it was over. But Jessica and Marcus taught me something important. Predators don't stop being predators just because they get caught once. They just find new victims. Leslie consulted her notes. Which brings us to Mrs. Eleanor Hoffman in Tampa, Florida. The screen filled with footage our cameras had captured in Tampa. Jessica entering Mrs. Hoffman's house, Marcus arriving with financial documents, the elderly woman looking increasingly frail and isolated. Your daughter and son-in-law were doing to Mrs. Hoffman exactly what they'd tried to do to you.
Exactly.
Same methods, same manipulation tactics, same systematic isolation of the victim from her existing support system. How did you find out? Mrs. Hoffman's daughter contacted the Independence Foundation, the organization I created after my own experience with elder abuse. When I heard the names Jessica and Marcus Trent, I knew immediately what was happening. The program showed footage from our Tampa investigation, Jessica and Marcus at banks at the elder law attorney's office, gradually taking control of Mrs. Hoffman's life and finances. In 8 months, how much money did they steal from Mrs. Hoffman? $347,000. They convinced her to cash out retirement accounts, mortgage her paid-off home, and purchase financial products that primarily benefited them through commissions. Leslie's voice was incredulous. Your own daughter stole nearly $350,000 from an elderly widow? My daughter and her husband are criminals, Leslie. The fact that Jessica shares my DNA doesn't change that reality. The program cut to footage from Mrs. Hoffman's arrest of Jessica and Marcus, both of them in handcuffs, being led away while their victim watched in confusion and betrayal from her front porch. They're now facing federal charges for elder fraud, which carries a potential sentence of up to 20 years in prison. Good, I said simply. They've destroyed enough lives. Mrs. Aniston, some people might say that you've been unusually harsh toward your own daughter. That family should forgive family. I looked directly into the camera, thinking about all the elderly victims I'd met through the foundation, all the families destroyed by predators who used love as a weapon. Leslie, love without boundaries isn't love, it's enabling. I spent 75 years loving my daughter unconditionally. She repaid that love by trying to steal my life from me. When I gave her consequences instead of forgiveness, she simply found a new victim to exploit. What would you say to other elderly people who might be facing similar situations? I'd say that your age doesn't make you powerless, and your love for family members doesn't obligate you to be their victim. You have rights, you have resources, and most importantly, you have worth beyond what you can provide to other people. And to family members who might be considering taking advantage of elderly relatives? My voice hardened. I'd tell them to remember Eleanor Hoffman, to remember that behind every elderly victim is potentially someone like me, someone with the resources and determination to make sure you face consequences for your crimes. We will find you, we will stop you, and we will make sure you never hurt anyone else again. The program concluded with updates on our foundation's work. Now operating in 18 states, having recovered over $150 million in stolen assets, and serving as a model for similar organizations internationally. As the cameras stopped rolling, Leslie shook my hand warmly. Carmen, that was powerful television. Your story is going to help a lot of people. That's all I've ever wanted, to turn my experience into something that protects other people. That evening, I flew back to Birmingham on my private jet, looking down at the lights of the cities below and reflecting on the journey that had brought me here. 2 years ago, I'd been a woman hiding her success, afraid to live the life she'd earned. Tonight, I was returning home after telling my story to millions of Americans, knowing that Jessica and Marcus would never hurt anyone else again. My phone buzzed with messages as the plane descended, congratulations from board members, interview requests from other media outlets, and updates from Patricia about the foundation's work. But the message that meant the most was from Margaret Hoffman in Seattle. Mrs. Aniston. Mom watched the show tonight. She finally understands what Jessica and Marcus were doing to her. She wants to thank you for saving her life. As we landed in Birmingham, I thought about the woman I'd been when this all began. Scared, isolated, manipulated by people who'd seen her love as weakness. That woman was gone forever, replaced by someone who understood that strength and compassion weren't opposites, but partners in the fight for justice. The next morning, I woke up in my penthouse to find that the 60-minute story had become national news. The Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, and USA Today all ran follow-up stories about elder abuse and the need for stronger protections. My phone rang constantly with speaking requests, consulting opportunities, and offers to expand the Foundation's work internationally. But the call that mattered most came at noon. Sandra Mitchell, calling from Tampa. Carmen, Jessica, and Marcus pled guilty to all charges. What kind of sentence? Jessica got 12 years in federal prison. Marcus got 15 because of his professional license and his history of targeting elderly clients. They'll also have to pay full restitution to Mrs. Hoffman and will be permanently barred from working in any capacity involving financial services for elderly people. I felt no triumph, only a deep sense of completion. Jessica had made her choices, faced her consequences, and would spend the next 12 years learning that actions have prices that must be paid. Sandra, what about Mrs. Hoffman? She's doing well. Her daughter moved her to Seattle to be closer to family, and we were able to recover most of her stolen money. She'll be comfortable. That afternoon, I stood on my balcony, looking out over Birmingham and thinking about the future. At 77, I was wealthier than I'd ever imagined possible, more influential than I'd ever dreamed, and more purposeful than I'd ever been. My phone rang one final time. Dr. Patricia Williams, calling from our foundation headquarters. Carmen, I have news. The Justice Department wants to fund a national expansion of our model. They're offering $50 million to establish elder abuse protection centers in all 50 states. $50 million? It's the largest federal commitment to elder abuse prevention in history. Carmen, we did it. We're going to protect elderly people across the entire country. As I hung up the phone, I realized that Jessica and Marcus's betrayal had given me something they never intended, the motivation to become exactly who I was meant to be. They'd seen a vulnerable old woman and tried to steal her future. Instead, they'd awakened a force that would protect vulnerable elderly people for generations to come. 6 months later, I was standing at the podium in the United Nations General Assembly in New York, addressing delegates from around the world about the global problem of elder abuse. The Independence Foundation had become an international model, with sister organizations operating in 12 countries. Distinguished delegates, I said, looking out at representatives from nearly every nation on Earth, elder abuse is not an American problem or a European problem or an Asian problem. It is a human problem that requires a coordinated global response. The speech was broadcast live around the world, and afterward, I was approached by delegates from dozens of countries asking for help establishing similar programs in their nations. As I left the United Nations building, I thought about the woman I'd been just 3 years ago, frightened, hiding, convinced that her only value lay in what she could provide to ungrateful family members. That woman was gone, replaced by someone who understood that her greatest success wasn't the fortune she'd accumulated, but the lives she'd protected and the systems she'd built to ensure that vulnerable people would never face alone what she had faced. My phone buzzed with a text from my pilot. Mrs. A, ready for departure whenever you are. Africa awaits. I smiled and climbed into my car. Tomorrow, I would be in Kenya, visiting refugee camps and meeting with officials about establishing elder protection programs for displaced populations. Next month, I would speak at Oxford University about the economics of elder abuse. And next year, I would testify before the International Criminal Court about making elder abuse a recognized crime against humanity. At 77, I wasn't slowing down. I was just getting started. Jessica and Marcus had tried to steal my future and instead had given me a purpose larger than anything I'd ever imagined. The scared victim they'd tried to create had become the global advocate they never saw coming. And I was far from finished. Thank you for joining me on this journey of transformation, revenge, and ultimately, redemption. If you enjoyed Carmen's story of turning betrayal into purpose, please subscribe to her true stories for more tales of women who refused to be victims and instead became warriors. Remember, you're never too old to reclaim your power, never too late to fight back, and never too weak to become exactly who you were meant to be. Hit that subscribe button, share Carmen's story with someone who needs to hear it, and remember, your age is not your cage, and your past is not your prison. The best chapters of your life may still be waiting to be written.